We are now live, Madam Chair.
Okay, it's still telling me that we are in a practice session. So I just wanted to wait for my notification.
Okay, we're all set.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mr. Verano. Welcome, members, to the first meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Committee, joined from two separate committees in this new council. Today is Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. I am joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Blumenfield, Councilmember Lee, Councilmember Harris-Dawson. Mr. Verano, do you want to call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Councilmember Rahman.
Here.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, present.
Councilmember Harris-Dawson.
Present.
Councilmember Rodriguez. Councilmember Rodriguez is absent. Councilmember Lee.
Present.
4 members and a quorum, Madam Chair.
Wonderful. I just wanted to start off with just a couple of introductory remarks. I am really eager and excited to be chairing this committee. The two issues, housing and homelessness, are inextricably linked. And I always wondered why they were in two separate committees in this city. Research has shown over and over again that the rates of homelessness in a city are most strongly linked to the availability of housing as a explanatory variable. And so for me, our approach to housing determined in many ways our approach to homelessness. So I'm really glad that we have this space to discuss both of these issues together. We're going to have a lot of different kinds of work coming through this committee, but I have a lot of high hopes for what this committee is going to achieve. On the issue of homelessness, I really hope that we collectively can move away from the district by district approach that we've been following in the city on the issue, whether it's on the creation of new interim housing, whether it's on hiring mobile health vans, whether it's on finding outreach workers, and to move to a citywide and holistic approach that helps us take on homelessness with the urgency that it deserves. We spent the last 2 years discussing where people can and mostly can't camp in the city. And I really want to focus in this committee on the issue that I think deserves much more attention, because we haven't done a good enough job on it, which is creating real places for people to go once they leave the streets. On the issue of housing, I think we have both real opportunities ahead and real threats. We have money potentially coming in from United to House LA, a ballot measure brought forward by residents of the city, voted for in significant numbers, and potentially bringing real dollars to this issue and to issues related to homelessness prevention, tenant protection, as well as on building housing. And it is an incredible opportunity. We also have the housing element ahead of us, where we have the mandate from the state to produce significantly more housing in this city than we've been asked to produce before. But we also have real threats ahead. The loss of potentially thousands of units of affordable housing thanks to expiring covenants is chief among them, and it threatens our capacity to support even our existing residents. And I am excited to work alongside all of you to ensure that we're using all of these opportunities, taking on these threats, and ensuring that our housing department and all of our housing machinery is not just thinking about the production of new housing, but thinking about homelessness prevention as one of its goals, displacement prevention as one of its goals, as one of its key goals, and something that we can work on together in order to preserve this city for the future. I wanted to move on to a discussion of what we're going to be talking about today, but I also wanted to open the floor to any of my fellow colleagues if they wanted to share any remarks at this time, or I can go through the consideration of our items. Go ahead, Councilmember Blumenfield.
I'll just be brief. I agree with you. I think it makes a lot of sense to link housing and homelessness. It didn't make sense for them to be two distinct committees, and putting them together bodes very well, and I'm excited about our new mayor's efforts and working with her and with this team here in this committee to make good things happen this year. So thank you for chairing this, and I look forward to a productive year.
Thank you. And great, I'm excited to see that we have the Councilmember Rodriguez joining us as well. Okay, seeing as we have no one else who wants to speak at this time, I want to move on to looking at our agenda. We have 13 items to consider on today's agenda, but we'll try and keep it as efficient as possible. I'll go through a quick overview of what the items are in advance of opening up for public comment. Item 1 is a report from the Homeless Strategy Committee, which is an interoffice committee that's staffed by the CAO. And this is an annual report that they have to submit, that the city has to submit to the state of California about our shelter crisis. And it's an annual requirement under the state code through which we declared a shelter crisis in this city in 2018. And it has some interesting statistics in it that I think can inform our policy moving forward. Item 2 is a report from the Prop HHH Administrative Oversight Committee about the first quarter report for fiscal year 2022-23. Item 3 is an LAHD report about the implementation of the right to return and right to remain provisions of the Housing Crisis Act, which is a state act. It also addresses the authority to amend LAHD's existing relocation contract to include the services that are required of us by the state for displaced tenants. Items 4 and 5 are revenue bonds for supportive housing projects, and in each case there's a report from LAHD and from the CAO in the file. In CD14, one of the projects is there, and it's the Bryan Residential Supportive Housing Project located at 3016 North Main Street. And in CD5, there's a project called Solaris Apartments, and it's located on Crenshaw Boulevard. Item 6 is approving an agreement with the people concerned to operate and maintain a bridge housing site, also in CD14 at 711 North Alameda Street. Item 7 is a motion from Councilmember Blumenfield about increasing support for LAHSA's winter shelter program and augmented winter shelter program and increasing their bed capacity and expanding winter shelter sites across the city. And I assume, Mr. Blumenfield, that you proposed this in response to the recent spate of rains and the need for more shelter. So I'm excited to see it. Item 8 is about the potential for a mass release program, something that we've been discussing in the city for a long time. And this came from Councilmember Yaroslavsky, who's excited to bring this both to CD5 and potentially citywide as well. We've been discussing it for a long time. I'm looking forward to seeing some mass release programs actually coming into action. Item 9 is a motion about creating a standardized RFP process for interim housing sites across the city. Item 10 is a motion about implementing Measure ULA and potentially providing funding for some of the things that ULA proposes even before the revenue becomes available. It's not actually saying that we should be funding that, it's just saying, can we fund it, and asking the departments to report back on it. Item 11 is a verbal update from LAHSA about the demobilization of Project Room Key, but based on conversations with LAHSA, we believe it'll be appropriate to continue this item to the next committee meeting, especially given that LAHSA has been reporting regularly on this over the past meetings and has made steady progress. I'm comfortable with that. Item 12 is a verbal update from LAHSA about the 2023 point-in-time count and changes in some of the methodology and administration between last year's count and this year's count. And we do have the demographer from LAHSA here to answer questions this time, which I hope will help answer some of the questions that came up last time that were not able to be answered. And finally, item 13 is related to the COVID-19 related eviction protections and some proposed new permanent protections for tenants. So with that, I want to move to public comment. We're going to take public comment on all items on this agenda. People are going to have 1 minute if they're speaking on one item, 2 minutes if they're speaking on multiple items, and 1 minute for general public comment if they ask for it. And I was assured that there will be an interpreter available for commenters, and I just want to confirm that, Mr. Barano.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to the city attorney to provide instructions on how the public can call in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To members of the public calling in, when it is your turn to speak, please state your name and which agenda item you would like to speak on. You have 1 minute to speak on the one agenda item or 2 minutes to speak on 2 or more items. In addition, those who would like to address the committee with general public comment will be provided 1 additional minute for a maximum up to 3 minutes per person for all agenda items, including general public comment. We will inform you when your time is up. When speaking on the agenda items, you must be on topic. Our goal is to get through as many speakers as we can. If you are not speaking on topic, or if we cannot tell whether you are speaking on an agenda item, I will give you 1 brief warning. If you do not immediately get clearly on topic, or if you stray off topic, you will forfeit the rest of your time and we will move on to the next speaker.
Great, thank you. Mr. Verano, are there instructions that you want to read in for the public to call in right now?
Yes, Madam Chair. Members of the public who would like to offer public comment on the items listed on the agenda should call 1-669-254-5252 and use meeting ID number 160-807-0689 and then press pound. Press pound again when prompted for participant ID. Once admitted into the meeting, press star 9 to request to speak. Thank you.
Great, thank you. At this time, we are ready to take public comments, and I'm gonna say that we're gonna take an hour of public comments for this meeting today, a maximum of an hour, so until 3:15.
You got it. Yeah, let me allow someone to speak. Thank you, Councilmember. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, my name is Jamie with the Coalition of Small Rental Property Owners. Item 13 in general, please.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Thank you. Dear Housing Committee, there is no doubt housing is an important topic for Angelenos. New regulation, or more euphemistically branded tenant protections, need thought, deliberation, and not haste with short-term band-aids. We urge the committee to carefully seek feedback from all stakeholders to come up with a balanced path forward. There should be an emphasis on the mom and pop and delineate from the corporate landlord after what the city and professional tenants have done to us. The current imposed ordinances and approach do nothing but attack mom and pops more. After 3 years of being asked to shoulder the burden of a worldwide pandemic, there is now imposition to trap mom and pops in these harmful policies. Many providers would have never entered the business with these regulations in place. When is the city going to allow mom and pops to make decisions for themselves and ability to plan for their own lives? When are the shackles coming off? The committee needs to consider more relief for mom and pops. For instance, there is nothing but imposition of relocation fees to get out of the mess that the city trapped them in. Although I don't think mom and pops should be assessed any fines, admin fees, or hefty relocation fees while their homes were stolen from them, at a very minimum, the city should look into relief and reduction of fees and roadblocks. I implore the committee to work with housing providers, not vilify them. I oppose all of the Rahman's policies to harm mom and pops. Please delineate the mom and pop from the corporate landlord. Carve the mom and pop out. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Yeah, my name is Robert. General comment and item 13.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comments, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Thank you. I'm calling because I'm concerned for my 85-year-old mother-in-law. She has a rental, and I can't believe this is still going on. The concept of not being paid for your work, it's just wrong. It goes against all common sense. Please, you need to reject this entirely, okay? Do not expand eviction controls. We have no issues, but please don't handcuff us any further. It's very overwhelming for my mother-in-law, and the family gets stuck having to look at the regulations to review. Okay, it's not really worth it anymore. It's not worth it. It's getting too much. So I'm just asking to end all the regulations. We're in a different place. COVID's over. I think the city is going to end the emergency entirely. It doesn't make sense why I just scratched my head. Why are we extending any of this? I'm the one who has to bring this to my family. It's just, they don't understand. It's a total overreach. Please, the government should be on our side and not on our back. So please think of this very deeply. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, Joyce Mitchell, items 13 and public comment. And I'm also with the Small Apartment Coalition. Thanking you for your time, committee.
Thank you. Sorry.
First of all,
I just want to tell you how many minutes you have, just so you can have the time. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comments, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Okay, thank you for your time. So I feel it is time to stop holding small apartment owners responsible for what city and county elected officials have failed to do with respect to the homeless crisis in this city, which is most evident by the failure to utilize and spend $150 million of federal funds that were allocated to assist the homeless. $150 million that was returned to the federal government because some group, with regard to the housing department, did not do their job. We feel that we have no representation with the city council. With all due respect, I appreciate that you remember we, the small apartment owners, are your constituents just like tenants. Your policies are causing especially brown and black owners who have their retirement invested in our properties to lose our property. Please end the eviction moratorium. We will be the next wave of homelessness in this city if you continue to treat us this way. Thank you for your time, committee.
Thank you. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Fred Sutton, all items and general public comment.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes in total for the items and 1 minute for general comment. Please begin. So 3 minutes in total.
Thank you, honorable committee members. I'm speaking on behalf of the California Apartment Association. Our members help house Los Angeles. We request the city cease extending any aspect of the COVID eviction moratorium, maintain reasonable statewide laws as implemented through AB 1482, and oppose any policies that prohibit a business owner's ability to collect compensation. Item 13 is complex. It is impossible to have a reasoned discussion on this much material in one item. Item 13A is unnecessary and will foster more confusion. The COVID declaration of emergency is ending January 31st. It is reasonable that all emergency regulations implemented due to the declaration end in their entirety. These policies have been abused and have lasted longer than anywhere else in the nation. Item 13B, AB 1482 is a statewide law that implements universal for-cause eviction protections to all multifamily units in the state. The 1-year vesting period before regulations become applicable should be reinserted into the ordinance, and the city should closely mirror state law as the original housing report from September recommended. The law balances consumer protections with operational flexibility. Item 13C, 1 and 2 should be opposed. This policy has had no formal feedback process since its introduction. It is just to be compensated for your work, labor, and time. The fabric of a trusting and reliable economy depends on the expectation that you are paid for services performed. The proposal is picking an arbitrary threshold which will ultimately hurt those the city intends to help. Screening standards might be raised in response, and private rental owners could be hesitant to work with vulnerable populations given the inability to collect compensation in full. But there is a better and proven alternative. The city should create a permanent rental subsidy program which can be drawn upon for those facing a temporary financial gap. Direct monetary assistance in these circumstances is the best way to address the intended aims of this proposal. These measures will have unintended and counterproductive consequences. The council must deliberate more on these important policies. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 4 digits, 7302, please press *6 to unmute. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Good afternoon. My name is Sasha Harnden. I'm calling to speak on general public comment and item 13.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment. So 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Thank you, and I will be brief. I would urge the committee to pass all of the recommended policies that are contained within this item. There has been robust stakeholder engagement. LAHD engaged in an entire process for that, which is outside of the norm. Stakeholder feedback is reflected in their initial report. The committee has already made accommodations for small landlords with simplified relocation assistance in the Just Cause ordinance, on top of the help that has been provided through county mortgage assistance programs, tax relief, et cetera, to small landlords. So the idea that these stakeholders are being ignored is quite frankly absurd. At the same time, we know the importance of tenant protections. We know you'll be discussing the point in time count. Our most recent counts showed the power of tenant protection to help with our goals around homelessness. It's owing to the emergency tenant protection that we saw much, much, much lower increases in homelessness in the most recent count. We also know these tenant protections have been life-saving public health protections and have helped to ensure that we have an equitable economic recovery from the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. So we simply don't have time to go round and round. These issues have been vetted, have been carefully considered, and now it is time to pass permanent tenant protection before the expiration of the emergency protection so that we don't see an increase in evictions and an ensuing wave of homelessness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chelsea Rosales, and I would like to speak on item 13 in general public comment.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Thank you. Hi, I'm a tenant who has lived in District 14 for a lot of years, and I'm here today with Industry Struggle and in solidarity with Keep LA House. I'm here to ask you to vote yes on item 13, and I want to urge you to extend emergency protections. Ending emergency protections now, especially without first implementing permanent ones, would be reckless and an inhumane thing to do. Our new mayor has declared a state of emergency on homelessness, and permanent tenant protections must be a part of this effort. We need to take action to prevent members of our community from falling into homelessness and give them a real opportunity to recover from financial inequities and that were exacerbated by the pandemic. Homelessness continues to be a systematic issue that we need to address. It is your responsibility to represent Angelenos and the city to propose solutions that bring positive changes to our community. We need an LA County Tenant Bill of Rights so that renters in all jurisdictions in the county are able to keep a roof over their head. We need to adopt permanent eviction protections in order to stabilize communities that have been most impacted by the pandemic. I'm asking you to please adopt a Tenant Bill of Rights, a universal just cause protections against eviction, to codify a right to counsel, repeal 4118, implement a community-led implementation of ULA funds, and create a social housing program that is meant for people and not for profit. Housing is a human right. Thank you.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 9200. Please press *6 to unmute. Okay, caller failed to unmute. We'll move on to the next caller. Hi, please state your name. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hello, my name is Denise Knitter. I'm calling on behalf of the LA County Business Federation, speaking on item 13 and general comment, please.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. As I stated, I'm here representing the LA County Business Federation. We appreciate the opportunity to comment on item 13 concerning the city's COVID-era housing regulations and the moratorium extension. We're requesting that the city cease extending any aspect of the eviction moratorium and maintain reasonable statewide laws that are implemented through bills such as AB 1482, and to oppose any policies that prohibit a business owner's ability to collect compensation. Our children are back in schools, vaccines and boosters are widely available, and our region is hosting the Super Bowl. There is no clear justification to continue any aspect of the city's eviction moratorium. Los Angeles is among the last jurisdictions in the entire country to maintain strict and burdensome regulations. We're asking you to end the policies that are exacerbating the housing crisis and for housing providers to provide adequate housing to Angelenos. Thank you.
Thank you. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
This is Ms. Foster. I'd like to speak on anything I can speak on, particularly number 13 and general comments.
Okay, thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comments, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Okay, first of all, I agree that tenant needs protections. I advocate for tenants, believe it or not, even though I'm a landlord. I just left the VA to pick up a form for one of my tenants, veterans who's disabled, so that he can get a reasonable accommodation and get benefits that he's entitled to. So that's not the issue. I think that your policies, however, strip landlords unjustly of their rights and their ability to help when they want to help. Your policy to create a minimum threshold before someone can be evicted is ridiculous, because it doesn't even take into the account that a lot of residents have Section 8. So that's where that HUD figure came from, the $1,700 that you're speaking of for a one bedroom, but they're never required to pay that whole amount. Section 8 pays a part of that. So it's basically what you're saying is that if a tenant's co-payment is $300 or $50, that they can just squat for 6 months, 18 months, or whatever the case may be, without paying. And so we still have, maintenance and water bills and things to pay. So the fact that you have not even considered that is problematic. And also, they're required to immediately report to the housing authority when there's a change in income, and what that happens in that instance is the housing authority adjusts their co-payment, they increase their payment and decreases the tenant's co-payment. So they're not at risk anyway. You should not be including people that are already subsidized by programs where they have the advantage over regular tenants in the first place. So that's problematic. The other thing is, and I don't have a dog in the fight about the other thing, because my property is under rent control, but in this other matter where you're trying to put restrictions on tenants or units that do not fall under the RSO, hello, that's government overreach, which you're going to end up in a lawsuit, which is going to be on the backs of taxpayers, because it's not sustainable. You cannot circumvent or do a workaround existing state and local laws to try and control units that do not fall under your jurisdiction. I mean, the law explicitly says.
Thank you,
that,
caller. That was 2 minutes. Sorry.
It was not.
Oh, sorry. That was 2 minutes. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, this is Nicole Grace. I would like to speak on item 13 and item 10, homelessness in section 8, and also general public comment.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes for the items and 1 minute for general comment, so 3 minutes in total. Please begin.
I've written this. This government body has reduced housing because new laws have radically increased the cost of being in the rental business. We have a program to help people for all illnesses, including COVID. It's called Section 8. That is, the government pays the landlord to help people affected for all kinds of emergencies. As you know, we sent $1.5 million of federal government money back to the federal government, and that is egregious. Also, I have a friend who can't even get on the list for Section 8 housing, and you've got to have a plan for all these people who need housing, and you're giving money back. I live in LA. I have 3 rentals. I'm considering buying another house, but out of state. Here's how I did my financial decision. I added up the costs, which is about $7,000 a month. That would cause me to lose about $2,500 a month in LA. So for my analysis, the LA median house can be bought for about $900,000. That's the median. My monthly, I have good credit at a 5.5% rate. That's $5,100 for a mortgage. Property taxes, $940. Then there's going to be $1,000 for repairs and maintenance, vacancy, plus a high risk of not getting rent and having to hire a lawyer. So that adds up to $7,000. However, according to Zillow, the expected rent for the average house of $900,000 is $4,500. So I'm looking at different states, and I'm like, Los Angeles is going to cost me $2,500 a month just to make this investment. It makes no sense. You're going to lose all kinds of rental housing, and you have been. Your laws are costing landlords real money. So I guess that's all I have to say. I hope, please, please, please have Section 8 at least be review these tenants and their backgrounds, because they're good at it, and they could make sure there's no cheaters. Right now, there's cheaters. So, please use Section 8. Thank you.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, my name is Abby King, and I wish to speak on item number 13 and general public comment.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment. Please begin.
Thanks. Good afternoon. My name is Abby King, and I'm a Legislative Affairs Manager with FICA, the Valley Industry and Commerce Association. The issues outlined in item 13 contain multiple complex aspects. We believe the various policy proposals should be separated and reviewed individually. Item 13A seeks to extend specific COVID-19 era renter protections beyond January 31st, 2023. Given our insight into the virus and improved public health response, we believe a complete end to the COVID-19 eviction moratorium is long overdue. The past December, the mayor called for an end to the citywide state of emergency effective January 31st of this year. All aspects of the eviction moratorium must end with it. FICA also has concerns related to the expansion of eviction restrictions into single-family homes, as outlined in item 13B. These expansions are a government overreach that will impact the ability for individuals to take in and house individuals on temporary assignment in our city, a change that Los Angeles cannot afford amidst an ongoing housing crisis. Finally, item 13C would prevent business owners from being properly compensated for their labor and services. Mutually agreed upon contract terms must be adhered to. The committee does not intend on applying this type of policy to other industries or services. Landlords should not be the exception to this rule. For these reasons, we urge you to oppose the proposed recommendations outlined in item 13. The city can no longer ignore the needs of landlords or further burden them with the task of solving the city's housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Please state your name and the item. Hi. Please say your items and the item. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on. So sorry.
Maria, and item 3 and item 13.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes for the items. Please begin.
Hi, I'm Maria, and I'm with Sage, and I'm calling in regards to item number 3 and item 13. For item number 3, we believe that a strong right to return policy that is enforced and monitored should be the priority of the housing department to protect vulnerable tenants who are facing harassment pressures to give up their right to return. We asked the committee to implement a 1-to-1 replacement requirement to reduce the incentive for landlords to evict tenants before filing for entitlements or to pressure them. Require developers to pay relocation assistance to low-income tenants consistent with the LA RSO and with Governor Code 72660, whichever is greater. Create specific relocation plan requirements for displaced tenants, which requires approval by the city, similar to that already existing, such as in the tenant habitability plan ordinance. And we also want this to include tenant anti-harassment protections, preventing the demolition of units that had sustained case of harassment or illegal eviction. Just in summary, we're just seeing a lot of SBA cases, and we do not feel that tenants have all the resources and information regarding their opportunities to come back to their units. For item number 13, we fully support, and we ask that you pass all the items on this agenda item. We need permanent tenant protection, universal just cause, relocation assistance, and a threshold on evictions for non-payment of rent. And we urge you to pass all these items today. Thank you.
Thank you. Please state your name and the item. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Danielle Idner-Pratt for the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles, and I'm commenting on item 13 and general public comment.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comments, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
The Council's actions on January 10th clearly indicate that the COVID-19 local emergency no longer exists and that it will end on February 1st. Absent the local emergency, there is simply no basis for the continued denial of property owner rights. The association remains opposed to the expansion of the RSI just cause citywide. The majority of city multifamily rental units, rental buildings are already subject to AB 14.2. However, should the ordinance move forward, we urge the committee to reinstate the one-year vesting period, extend the scope of the reduced relocation fee provisions to small owners of all types of rental properties, and eliminate the new notice filing requirements. With regard to the LAHD report, we strongly oppose these proposals, which would significantly and permanently alter rental housing policies, and for which minimal information regarding the scope of the issues or any data to support the need for the ordinances has been provided, let alone the lack of stakeholder engagement. The report raises far more questions than it answers. We believe the proposed relocation fee requirements violate state law, and as such, the city is preempted. For nearly 3 years, the city's rental housing buyers have experienced challenging rent collections, and in many instances, the inability to collect any rent caused by the COVID-19 emergency measures. The proposed monetary threshold would turn these interim challenges into permanent barriers to housing providers' ability to collect legally owed rent, and ultimately force more owners to leave the business. We urge the committee to be mindful of the harmful impacts of all these matters will make it nearly impossible for the vast majority of independent owners to provide the service of rental housing due to the intrinsic financial and related risks that would now be involved. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, caller. Interpreter, can we maybe read the instructions in Spanish? The caller does not unmute.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now.
Yes, no problem.
Hi, sorry.
Okay.
Caller muted now.
Yeah.
Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Number 13 and general comments. And my name is Donna Barstow. I'm a member of
thank
ACE.
you. Okay. So you have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment. Please begin.
Thank you. And I don't have as much written down as everybody else seems to, so this is more off the cuff. First of all, somebody mentioned Ma and Pa landlords, and this is kind of what I'm going to talk about. That expression, Ma and Pa, was invented by AGLA. It was invented by these apartment groups as propaganda so that we sound like Little House on the Prairie. There's no such thing as a Ma and Pa. We have small landlords, but we also have very smaller tenants. And I would like to just say that maybe we need an expression for tenants, for little tenants or something like that to stand up to Ma and Pa, because this idea that somehow it's a folksy, familiar thing is not true. Some people have a guaranteed roof over their head, and others of us have to keep renting from them. For the last 2 years, I have had the unenviable position of renting a room in a house or a condo. There is an underground river of renters that is completely unprotected by LAHD. And that includes roommates. The thousands, hundreds of thousands of roommates that are out there in the city. I estimate from the numbers I've gotten from LAHD when I've investigated, there's about 25% of all renters in the city are not protected because we are on our own and we don't have the same protections as RSO people do. And in particular, I wanted to mention how important it is in Section 13 for the Universal Just Cause, because it's really, really hard when you are renting a room from an owner to get any protection at all.
2 minutes, caller, sorry. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Maria Lopez, item 13 in general public comment.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm the coordinator for the Keep LA House Coalition and a tenant currently in danger of displacement. I'm in tremendous support for item 13 in its totality, and I advocate further for a strong tenant bill of rights for all LA city tenants. In the midst of a new variant wave of COVID-19, it is reckless and inhumane to even consider eliminating critical tenant protections without permanent ones to take that place. In a city where almost 50% of the population is renters, it is reckless and inhumane to even consider eliminating critical tenant protections without permanent ones to take that place. When inflation is skyrocketing and rent prices along with it, it is reckless and inhumane to even consider eliminating critical tenant protections without permanent ones in place. Where the mayor has declared a state of emergency on homelessness, it is reckless and inhumane to even consider eliminating critical tenant protections without permanent ones to take that place. In general, it is reckless and inhumane to consider eliminating critical tenant protections without permanent ones to take that place. I encourage you all today to pass item 13 and let's keep LA House. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 4 digits, 0305, please press *6 to unmute. Interpreter, do you maybe want to give, oh, they unmuted, sorry. They unmuted.
Hi,
Please say your name and the items you wish to speak on.
my name is Laverna Dirks. I'm speaking on item 13C and general comment.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment. Please begin.
Yes, I am calling the committee to implement strong permanent protection for tenants and ending the eviction moratorium to prevent a wave of eviction for the city. You need to adopt a universal just cause, displacement location assistance, and lower the threshold for eviction to protect our most valuable community. I am asking the committee to consider all these proposals under the universal just cause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
please.
My name is Vanessa Bailey. Item 13C and public comment.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment. 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
I'm a 31-year resident of CD10 and a business owner in CD8. I am also a landlord and a proud member of Community Coalition. I'm calling to urge the committee to implement the 3 permanent protections for tenants, including my 94-year-old mother, before ending the eviction moratorium. The city of LA needs to adopt universal just cause rules that apply to all rental units in LA, not just those under rent control. Too many of my neighbors are on the street, and I don't want to see more. We must enforce strong permanent protection for tenants before we end the eviction moratorium. The more of my neighbors are not on the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Caller with the last 4 digits, 6846. Please press *6 to unmute. Interpreter, do we maybe want to give instructions in Spanish?
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay. Ahora estamos dando las instrucciones en español para las personas. Deberían llamar al 1669-254-5252 y utilizar el número de la reunión 160-807-0689 y luego presionar el numeral. Presionar de nuevo para poner la identificación y luego presionar *9 para solicitar hablar. Y luego cuando se les pida *6 para poder hablar. Muchas gracias. Thank you. That will be it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give them a few seconds.
Okay, I think
call to unmute, yeah.
maybe we can move to the next caller.
Yeah, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
My name is Bijan Gaimi, calling to speak on number 13 and general public comment.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
I'm a tenant organizer with Community Power Collective. I urge the committee to pass item 13. It's incumbent on this committee to pass these permanent protections in order to prevent even more vulnerable families from getting kicked out on the street. This includes providing just cause for all units in the city of Los Angeles so that landlords can't evict people without reason whenever they want to hike up rents. It's imperative for council members to also require all landlords in the city of LA to provide relocation funds in any case there are no-fault evictions or when there are outrageous rent hikes which tenants can't afford. This is the very least that the city can do to make sure that vulnerable tenants do not end up homeless or in more dangerous situations. Many of these tenants who face these kinds of no-fault evictions and rent hikes often have very young children or are seniors or disabled. I think every human being should be able to agree that no children or seniors or disabled people should be evicted. They need every kind of assistance possible to be able to keep their family under a roof when their landlords take these eviction actions which only serve to build their personal wealth or preserve their investments. If this is the case for multi-unit properties, it makes sense that it should also apply to properties not covered under 1482. Landlords need to be aware of the fact that if they buy rental properties as investments, it comes with liabilities and risks. Lastly, this council should lead the country in passing a bill which includes putting limits on evictions for tenants who fall behind paying 1 month's rent. Once these protections end, we will begin to see a wave of evictions if a tenant owe as little as $100 or $1. This law is antiquated and must be updated. Tenants who fall ill, catch COVID-19, which still exists, lose their job, have high medical bills, and can't cover their rent 1 month should not be punished by getting evicted. Without the extension or passing of these protections, tenants stand to lose much, much more than landlords, small or corporate. Many stand to lose their lives and risk their physical and mental health. So these council members should be focused on preserving people's physical and mental well-beings and not preserving investments. By the way,
Thank you, caller. That was 2 minutes. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, my name is Kimberly, and I'd like to speak on item 13.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item. Please begin.
I'm a tenant, and I want to strongly urge you to vote yes on this item to pass permanent tenant protections, including universal just cause, relocation assistance, and a threshold on eviction for non-payment of rent. We need to have these protections in place without any compromises that will continue to jeopardize tenants. And we need these implemented before tenant protections expire this month to ensure that no one experiences a gap in protections that will leave them vulnerable to eviction. We are still in a COVID-19 surge. Many of our community members' health has been impacted and were left out of work during the holidays. Ending these protections now, especially without implementing permanent ones, would be a reckless and inhumane thing to do. And like you've heard before, our mayor has even declared a state of emergency on houselessness, and permanent protections must be part of this effort. Honestly, if you do not have the mental capacity or morality to treat tenants as dignified human beings, then you should not be a landlord. You are not a housing provider. You are a housing exploiter by organizing to strip away the little protections.
Thank you, caller. That was a minute. All right, please state your name and the items you're speaking on.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Zeke Sandoval on behalf of PATH, People Assisting the Homeless, on items 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, and general public comment.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes in total for all items and 1 minute for general comments, so 3 minutes in total. Please begin.
Thank you. Well, let me say we're pleased to welcome this new committee and look forward to working with all of you and your staff on confronting our city's biggest challenge. First, on item 8, as members of this committee are likely aware, PATH runs an expansion of our Lease Up LA program, similar to master leasing, called Residential and Property Supportive Services, or RPSS. The integration of our acquired units combined with the incentives for property owners makes for an effective program all around. So we look forward to working with Councilmember Yaroslavsky and all of you to accomplish this goal. On item 9, a standardized RFP schedule and site review process has proven effective in other cities at quickly making more beds available. So we're thankful to Chair Rahman for moving this idea forward. Of course, as members of this committee know, city government must invest in a variety of permanent options too, so Angelenos have a stable and sustaining path out of homelessness. On item 10, as an early and vocal supporter of Measure ULA, we're pleased to see the council start preparing now to make the best use of incoming funds. Angelenos need help today and are looking to the city for assistance today. So the sooner the housing department and other agencies prepare for ULA revenue, the faster it can be spent on affordable housing and tenant protection. And on items 13 and 3, it's simple. Tenant protection is homelessness prevention. The package of reforms in item 13 would be transformative, lifting tenants to a more even footing without unduly burdening smaller landlords. No one should be evicted before exhausting every option to come to an agreement that works for both tenant and owner. Universal just cause protections and forbidding evictions over less than a month's rent enable those conversations. Firmer rules around relocation assistance mean tenants and owners have better options than eviction in case an agreement can't be reached. And of course, enforcement of those protections is critical. Far too often, our clients have passed share stories of falling through the cracks in city housing law or even losing their homes in direct violation of the law. We support item 3 because consistent enforcement of laws like right to return and right to remain makes the housing market better for everyone. Tenants and owners know what to expect and how to adapt. Developers can meet our city's housing goals without encountering very reasonable fears of displacement. For the sake of easing the many burdens on nonprofit affordable housing developers, we ask you consider excluding affordable developments from the impact fees described in the item. Ultimately, the city must encourage dramatically more new housing, and these crucial protections will go a long way to prevent displacement and homelessness while our communities grow. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 4 digits, 7116, please press *6 to unmute. Interpreter, do you want to give instructions in Spanish?
Sure, no problem. Para los miembros del público que les gustaría dar un comentario público en la lista de temas de la agenda, deberían llamar al 1669-254-5252 y luego utilizar la identificación de la agenda 160-807-0689 y luego presionar numeral. Presionar numeral de nuevo es para poner la identificación. Una vez que ya estén dentro, presionan *9 para solicitar hablar. Y una vez que ya están dentro, una voz automatizada de Zoom les dirá cuándo pueden presionar *6 para poder hablar. Gracias por su cooperación. Thank you.
Thank you. Caller failed to unmute. I'm going to go to the next caller just to allow more callers to speak. Caller with the last 4 digits, 5631, please press *6 to unmute. And caller failed to unmute, since the instructions were given in Spanish before as well. Caller with the last 4 digits, 3682, please press *6 to unmute. Okay, caller also failed to unmute.
I wonder what's going on.
Yeah, let me see this next caller.
Have 3 callers in a row failed to unmute?
Yeah, this one unmuted now. So please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, my name is Jackie Romero, and I want to speak on item 13 in general public comment.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comments, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Hello, honorable committee members. My name is Jackie Romero with the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce, calling on behalf of the 503,000 businesses in Los Angeles to address item 13. The LA Chamber has deep concerns related to item 13, Part T. We urge this body to oppose any policies that prohibit a business owner's ability to collect compensation. Business owners must receive payment for their labor, hard work, and service. It is foundational to a thriving and modern economy. We must continue to work to create a stability in the market and create an environment that is attractive to those who want to take risks and start a business. This includes attracting investment and our desperately needed housing supply. We urge the committee to oppose this proposal. We should not be moving goalposts in private contracts or changing the definition of mutually agreed upon terms. This is a bad precedent. The Chamber understands that the need to help those facing economic strain. The city should create a permanent rental subsidy pool that can be drawn upon when individuals face a temporary financial gap. Focus on more robust rental subsidy, not depriving individuals and families from compensation for their work. Thank you for your consideration and the opportunity to share the perspective.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last four digits, 6671. Please press *6 to unmute. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, my name is Robert. Items 13C and general comments.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comments, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
I'm calling in to urge.
Hi, this is Pastor Deborah Purnell from Community Coalition, and I'm calling for item 13C and general comments.
Thank you. So you have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comments, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Thank you. I'd like to urge the committee to adopt the three main recommendations that will protect the most vulnerable neighbors, which include universal just cause, displacement relocation assistance, and lowering the threshold for eviction. Without this recommendation, the streets will have thousands of additional people on the street. And what we are requesting is just cause, with an emphasis on just. I was personally evicted because the large complex that I lived in, over 300 people, the average rent $2,400. So these are people with relatively decent credit and paying decent rent. All of the people that used stimulus funds were evicted, and they were evicted during the short moratorium after the first COVID wave and the moratorium was over. That during that short period, they evicted all of us because under the state, we had to pay 25% of the rent. And then the federal, but if the federal picked up and paid 100%, we overpaid 25%. So those landlords evicted us to keep from returning that extra 25% that they got. They got 125% of the rent, and they evicted every one of us. And they didn't have just cause, other than that the leases had expired. And none of the leases were renewed, which I was there 3 years. So most people had expired leases. So they used that as a cause to evict us all and put us out on the street where now the rents were $500, $600 more. So a lot of us were put out and displaced. So when we say just cause, the owners should be supportive of that too. Just like they don't want the banks using unjust methods to foreclose on them. So tenants should not be put out on the street for any old reason. So that's what we're asking for, a list of reasons, legitimate reasons to evict. Everyone that is evicted didn't. The problem was not that they didn't pay rent. I offered them rent and money for all the time from the time.
That was 2 minutes. Hi, good afternoon. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, my name is Cassidy Bennett. I would like to speak on agenda item number 13 and general public comment.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Thank you. My name is Cassidy Bennett, and I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles and a tenant in District 10. I'm calling in today in solidarity with the Keep LA House Coalition to request that you bring the tenant protections to the full council on Friday with a recommendation that they're voted on as is. We need universal just cause to protect the majority tenants that live here in LA. We should not be making exceptions and creating carve-outs that will end up impacting low-income families more than anyone else. We also need a minimum threshold for failure to pay because no one should be losing their home for falling behind on rent just because they lost a few days of work. As an organization that handles many eviction defense cases, Lasla sees evictions pursued against tenants who are unable to work and got behind by just a few $100s. We can't make people choose between food and rent. For tenants who are evicted, we need to implement relocation assistance for everyone because when tenants are displaced and we're already barely able to afford to make rent, they should at least be receiving financial assistance at cost of moving expenses. We ask that you please bring these 3 policies forward to the full council on Friday so that you and your colleagues can enact permanent protections before the end of January. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Yes, my name is Maria Isabel Rutledge. I'm with Community Coalition in the 8th District. I'm been living here for about 60 years now, and I want to speak on items 3, 13, and general public.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes in total for the items and 1 minute for general comments, so 3 minutes in total. Please begin.
Yes, on item 3, I'd like to insist that our tenants have a right of return. Is that there's just so much that the tenants don't know their rights, and the landlords really take advantage of them. Then when it comes to the universal just cause, displacement, relocation assistance, and lowering threshold for eviction, that has to be in effect. That is a total yes, because we need to make sure that we treat people as human beings and that we respect them. Section 8 must be extended immediately. People need to not be waiting for years when they apply, because their need is now. And the city needs to stop pitting small landlords and tenants against each other. They need to take responsibility and do what is necessary. I'm calling to urge the committee to adopt the 3 main recommendations that will protect the most vulnerable neighbors in my community. And so please make sure that you put yourself in the place of our community, of our low-income community, and knowing that they don't know all their rights and they are being abused by the landlords. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. And I just wanted to say we're approaching the end of the hour that I had originally designated for public comment. I'm going to take 3 more callers at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Hi, please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, my name is Marissa Garcia, and I'm calling on behalf of Move LA and speaking on agenda item 10.
Thank you. So you have 1 minute for the item. Please begin.
Good afternoon, committee members. With the City of LA's COVID tenant protections expiring at the end of the month, many renters in the city are going to find themselves in a dire situation, facing eviction, and for some, homelessness. Last fall, voters in the City of LA overwhelmingly approved Measure ULA to address the city's homelessness crisis and to implement strategies to prevent homelessness, including emergency rental assistance, tenant rights education, and legal counsel for those facing eviction. Given the onslaught of evictions just around the corner, we ask the committee to support the motion to move forward with expediting the implementation of Measure ULA so that at-risk tenants are able to access the protections approved by voters. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last four digits, 0818. Please press *6 to unmute. Please state your name.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can hear you. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Sure. Hi, my name is Alfonso Directo, calling to support items 10 and 13.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes in total for the items. Please begin.
Oh, and can I do general public comment as well?
Okay, so 3 minutes in total. Please begin.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Alfonso Directo. I'm the Advocacy Director at ACT LA. I'm a tenant in Council District 5 and calling in today for ACT LA. ACT LA supports item 10, the motion on ULA implementation, and we also support item 13, tenant protections as recommended by Keep LA House. I urge your immediate action to implement ULA programs, including tenant protections, which will keep thousands of people from becoming homeless. It would be a tragedy to let emergency protections end and have a gap before we stand up programs that ULA promises to permanently fund in the near future. LA City voters passed Measure ULA in November to fund an affirmative suite of homelessness prevention and housing production programs that will help counter the force with historically hostile housing policies, and it will keep people housed. ULA funds, however, aren't slated to start until April at the least, but emergency protections are slated to end this month. I encourage the city to find and start spending the funds now on ULA to keep people housed. Please move urgently to find the temporary dollars to keep people housed as we wait for ULA dollars to come in. Thank you, Councilmembers Rahman, Hernandez, and Harris-Dawson for the motion on implementing ULA, which is item 10 on today's agenda. We applaud your leadership and hope it can be approved quickly. City Council has an opportunity now to act boldly and to deliver for voters what ULA promises to permanently fund in the near future and what they have said is the top priority, housing people and keeping people housed. We are in a state of emergency and LA City voters have spoken. We all need to work together to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take one more caller, and that will be our last caller. I understand that there's a lot of people who wish to be heard on this item. We've been hearing comments on these over the past few housing committee meetings. And I want to encourage anyone who hasn't been heard today to write a note into the council file. It's fairly easy if you go to the council file management system to do that. But we'll take our last caller now.
Thank you, Councilmember. Please state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Yes, my name is Elizabeth. I'd like to make a general public comment on item 13, please.
Thank you. You have 1 minute for the item and 1 minute for general comment, so 2 minutes in total. Please begin.
Thank you. Today, for my general public comment, I would like to remind you all of the over 16 or 17,000 people living in cars and RVs across Los Angeles. This is inhumane to keep them living in these, and I understand that it's Mayor Bass's state of emergency right now, but according to the city attorney, his opinion said that people living in cars and vehicles and RVs and trailers and trucks are not counted in this emergency order. Don't you think that's inhumane for the city not to include all of those unhoused people? Meanwhile, they are causing a considerable amount of public health and safety hazards throughout the city. All the human waste, biohazard material is going into storm drains, down the LA River, into the ocean. They are letting go of waste in front of homes, schools, parks. It's also attracting a lot of people who are illegally renting out RVs to the unhoused and taking advantage of them. It's also it's giving opportunity to a lot of crime and prostitution and drug manufacturing, like the people manufacturing crocodile down on Vine. There's over 60 RVs on Forest Lawn Drive. there is a Bayona wetlands disaster caused by all the RVs there. I would like this addressed. I don't understand why you can't have a buyback and destroy program and get these people housed. Why aren't you including this in all of the emergency orders with the city and the county to get all of these people housed and this cleaned up and the criminal factions decreased? Also on item 13, I'd like to say that I'm a renter, but you know, it's not also fair. You need to have a program that equally and fairly creates a rental housing program within the city of Los Angeles so the landlords can be paid directly, and that's fair. They're getting paid for their work.
That was 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, great. Thank you so much for all the callers who've been calling in. I know there's a lot on the agenda that is of intense interest for residents in the city, and I'm delighted to hear all of this feedback. And as I said earlier, I think it would be great if people who weren't able to be heard are able to make a comment in the council file or call in to Friday's council meeting where the agenda items that have been generating the most comment will also be heard. So at this time, based on my conversation with Lhasa, as I mentioned earlier, without objection, I want to move that we continue item 11 to our next committee meeting, unless there's any objections from other committee members. And then I want to recommend that also that we take items 4 through 10 on consent, unless there are any objections. Are committee members comfortable with that?
I just wanted to say a few things about 7, but I'm happy to have it go on consent, but I just wanted to make a couple of comments.
You know, why don't you go ahead and make those comments now?
I'll be very quick. I mean, the reason I put this forward, if now is appropriate, Madam Chair.
Please, yes, this is a good.
No, it was so frustrating. You know, I was doing outreach this weekend, all the social media about the winter shelters saying that spaces are available. And I was out there in the rain this weekend with my staff and trying to get people into the winter shelters, and they were not available. And in fact, when people called in, my staff did a test, waited on the line for 4 hours to get through to someone just to find out that there was no winter shelter available in our area. And so this motion is designed to address that. And some of this is on Lhasa, some of this is on us. I think this is a productive step to move forward, but it's not. There's no way that a homeless person is going to stay on the phone for 4 hours or 2 hours or 1 hour. Most of the people you come across, you know, if they have a phone, a lot of them do, but they don't have a charge for that long. You know, my team was able to stay on the line that long just because we were able to plug in. But it was born out of frustration. I mean, it's a modest step moving forward here, but I just wanted to express that frustration and urge an aye vote on for the report back.
Thank you, Councilmember, for bringing this forward. And I think what you described about the waits and the lack of beds is horrifying, and I do hope that we can rectify that. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Blumenfield, for bringing this up. Because I do have the only emergency winter shelter for the entire San Fernando Valley in my district. I will tell you, it has been heavily utilized. Not just by those of us here in the San Fernando Valley in the city of Los Angeles, but also by the city of Burbank. So when you want to talk about why there's an oversubscription of some of these resources, and we're having conversations, let's have a real accountable conversation about who's stepping up in terms of cities and who isn't. And not to mention that the placements at my emergency shelter site also contribute to my numbers of homeless population. So I think, you know, if we're gonna, look, kudos for doing what you're doing, but I gotta call it out because it is what it is. And I've been saying this for 5.5 years now. You know, we corrected the operations of the facility. We have gotten it to a place where it wasn't a nuisance. That's how I developed the the policies around making it a good neighbor policy, and helping to inform any other establishments like that across the city. But again, it's a reminder of the responsibility, and you know, we talk about things in a fragmented manner. But I need to bring to light how again, other municipalities that are not in the city of Los Angeles have been stepping up to do their part. And so we bear the burden of a lot of these conversations that several of the other 87 cities within the county of Los Angeles haven't stepped up to. So thank you for that.
Well, and thank you, Councilmember, for your leadership in having this site in your district, and for welcoming so many people who needed refuge into it, and for really making it a site that's welcomed by the community around it as well. I think that takes a huge amount of work, and you know, I think it's work that it must be commended. So with that, unless there's any objections, I'm going to recommend that we take the roll for items 4 through 10 at this time, and hope that we're able to address both the lack of winter shelter beds in this report back, as well as questions around what we are doing as a city and how we're collaborating, or as it may be not collaborating, with our fellow cities in LA County. Mr. Verano, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson. Councilmember Harris Dawson. Councilmember Harris Dawson is absent. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
4 ayes, and these items are approved.
And I believe Councilmember Harris Dawson is back.
Yes. Councilmember Harris Dawson, yes. 5 ayes, and these items are approved.
Okay, fantastic. So let's move on to item 13, which I think is the meatiest item on today's agenda. Mr. Verano, could you please read? Oh, go ahead. Okay, you'll have a big thing to read right now. Go ahead and please read the item into the record.
Sure, Madam Chair. Item number 13A is an exemption from the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the State CEQA Guidelines and Article 2, Section 1 of the City CEQA Guidelines, City Attorney Report Number 22-0413, and revised draft ordinance dated November 18th, 2022, relative to amending Article 14.6, Chapter 4 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code, LAMC, to sunset eviction protections related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and adding Article 11 to Chapter 20 of the LAMC to waive fees, fines, and penalties as specified. B is an exemption from the CEQA pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the State CEQA Guidelines and Article 2, Section 1 of the City CEQA Guidelines, City Attorney Report Number 22-0414, and revised draft ordinance dated November 18th, 2022, relative to adding Article 5 to Chapter 16 of the LAMC to prohibit terminations of tenancies without just cause and requiring relocation assistance for no-fault evictions as specified, amending the rent stabilization ordinance provisions on resident manager evictions, tenant notifications, and relocation assistance, and repealing duplicative or expired LAMC provisions relating to evictions. C, a Los Angeles Housing Department report dated November 2, 2022, relative to recommendations for the expiration of the COVID-19 eviction moratorium, adoption of tenant relocation assistance protections for economic displacement, and a threshold for evictions for non-payment of rent for all residential rental units.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to set the table for us as we invite the Housing Department to provide its report here. On June 24th of last year, the City Council, in the context of discussing how to end the eviction moratorium, separate from a discussion of the COVID state of emergency, instructed the Housing Department to come back with instructions on how to end the eviction moratorium, but also to report back on existing protections for tenants on gaps in those protections and options to address those gaps, including the expansion and strengthening of just cause protections. This was the instruction of the council in the beginning of the summer of last year. And in response to that, the housing department came back with a set of recommendations, which is what we find before us today. So I wanted to just make it clear that this is the housing department's recommendations that came out of a request from the city council to look at exactly this question of how we fill gaps in tenant protections here in the city of Los Angeles. With that, I want to turn it over to Ana Ortega from the housing department, who is going to present on what the housing department recommended on the basis of their experience serving tenants and landlords here in the city of Los Angeles. And Anna, Ms. Ortega, if you could also talk to, speak to some of the consultation that you did in putting together these recommendations. I know that the instructions also requested that you do significant community outreach. I think that would be useful because some of the committee members here are new to the ins and outs of this particular agenda item.
Good afternoon, council members. Ana Ortega, Assistant General Manager of the Housing Department for the Regulatory Code and Compliance Bureau. As was stated by Councilwoman Rahman, the Housing Department was requested to provide recommendations to fill in any gaps as the city contemplated lifting the COVID-related eviction protections. We've submitted reports dated August 25th and November 2nd, and those have been considered. And there's been considerable discussion about them. Altogether, the recommendations under consideration today would provide greater protections against arbitrary evictions for approximately 396,000 post-1978 rental units, as well as enhanced relocation assistance. We have been discussing them with community groups and individuals, landlord associations, and individual landlords for many months now. So some of these protections and items today have to do with the lifting of the eviction moratorium, which the council has already approved for January 31st, but there are associated items that go with that going forward. Some of them have to do with permanent protections for evictions for non-RSO tenants, otherwise known as just cause. And we've actually been working on this since before the pandemic and had submitted a report to council in January 2020. And now we're circling back to implement just cause eviction protections. Some of them have to do with relocation assistance and also are a follow-up to the request of the committee in that what's before the council now would extend eviction protections to all rental units, including multifamily and including single family. So would you like me to discuss 13A?
Yeah, I think it would be useful if we could go through these one by one, because it is quite a large council file, and we will end up having to vote on these separately.
Yes, thank you for that guidance. Yes, so 13A would codify the expiration of the COVID-19 tenant protections set to expire January 31st. This has been considered already, so what we have before us today are actually the implementing ordinances by the city attorney. The main things that these would do is to codify the repayment period for rental debt that tenants may have accrued since the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020 through January 31st, 2023. And basically there are two repayment periods provided for. One is in accordance with the provisions of state law for rental debt accrued up through September 2021. And then the city has elected to provide 12 months to pay back rental arrears for any rental debt owed from October 1st, 2021 through the end of the moratorium on January 31st, 2023. Other items that those ordinances would do have to do with providing a notice period for any pending evictions pursuant to Alice, and to allow an appeal period for changes in tenant status. Additionally, the committee requested that the city attorney write an ordinance that would extend the protections for tenants who may have brought in additional tenants and pets in the course of the COVID pandemic. There is concern about expiring those protections for that group of tenancies. So the ordinance would extend protections for those against eviction for having additional tenants and additional pets for an additional 12 months. So they would have until February 1st, 2024 to make other arrangements about any additional tenants and pets that may not have been permitted under the terms of their lease. And finally, those ordinances would waive fees and penalties that may have accrued to landlords due to their inability to comply with any governmental order to vacate. So that would be the main provisions of item 13A.
Thank you, Ms. Ortega, for that. And just to clarify, these ordinances went through the Housing Committee, went through the Ad Hoc Committee on COVID, and then went through full council. The City Council requested ordinances to come back with these instructions, and the ordinance is coming back to us. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And just so I understand as well, because the COVID state of emergency is now scheduled to end on January 31st, these ordinances essentially help us regulate what the end of the COVID state of emergency means for the end of the eviction protections that are linked to that COVID state of emergency.
Yes, very much so. And they also, I think, provide clarity to the public about what applies and what has to happen as we move forward in lifting the moratorium on evictions.
Okay, thank you. Because, I just want to make sure that each of these are fresh in our minds. I think it might be useful to separate out discussion on these items as we go through them. Are there additional questions on 13A at this time? I know we've heard these in committee and council, depending on where people were. Okay, no other questions or concerns here. So I think, go ahead, Councilmember Bloomfield. You're on mute.
The SCEP fee, the SCEP fee, is that passable to tenants under this?
Yes, fees for both the RSO and the SCEP fee have been eligible to be passed through actually throughout the pandemic period, so that would continue.
Great. No, and this is important, and I think especially the little bit of extra time for folks who've gotten pets and different folks who are in the apartment, and it gives a little more running room for folks. So I think it's an important one. So thank you.
Great. Any other questions for members on this committee? Okay, why don't we take a vote on this at this time, if everyone's comfortable with that. On 13A, Mr. Verano, can you call the roll on 13A, please?
Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris-Dawson.
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
5 ayes, and this item is approved.
Thank you. Let's move on to 13B. Ms. Ortega, if you could provide your report on 13B and what went into that, why you're recommending it in this particular way. And I believe we also have the city attorney here available to answer questions on 13B, although I don't believe they'll be making a presentation.
Thank you, Councilwoman. 13B is what we call the Just Cause Ordinance. This would apply to evictions for non-RSO units. And as I mentioned, this would affect approximately 396,000 rental units in the city, post-1978 rental units, including single-family dwellings and condos. So this has been, though it's not a new thing, as as we were looking to address gaps in protections, this was a pending policy before the council. It would basically extend the RSO protections against arbitrary evictions and require a reason for a landlord to evict a tenant. It would apply to all rental properties except for those exemptions that already apply in the RSO. It gives the same general reasons for termination of tenancy as provided in the RSO. It would provide the same relocation amounts that are currently in the RSO for no-fault evictions. And no fault, of course, is when tenants haven't done anything wrong. There is no relocation provided anywhere for tenant at-fault evictions. But for no-fault evictions, like when a owner wants to move into the rental unit, or they want to move in a resident manager, or the landlord wants to stop being in the rental business, they need to pay relocation assistance to tenants affected. So there are some exceptions to the regular relocation amounts, and those are for individually owned single-family dwellings. Per discussion at prior meetings, the relocation assistance would be just 1 month's rent. So that's for non-corporate single-family dwellings. And there's also a new provision that a landlord would be able to offset any accumulated rent that the tenant owes against any relocation payment due, unless it's an eviction to comply with a government order for an unpermitted unit. There's some additional provisions there. And I will just mention, while we're on the topic of relocation assistance, that mom and pop rental owners are able to pay a lower amount for evictions for family occupancy or owner occupancy. So the earlier council adopted provisions that allow a somewhat lower relocation payment when an owner must evict a tenant as they're seeking to occupy their own unit. The Just Cause ordinance has other improvements, we'll say, and that is that landlords must give tenants a notice of all of their protections for any new tenancy, and must post in the common area of the property. And finally, landlords would be required to provide notice to the housing department when they terminate their tenancy. That would also be a new requirement. So that kind of summarizes the major provisions of the Just Cause ordinance that would apply to non-rent stabilized rental units. I'll pause there in case there's any questions about that.
I'm sure that there will be. I want to make sure that we have somebody here from the city attorney's office as well available to answer questions about the ordinance. Oh, okay. Well, let's start the questions, and hopefully a representative from the city attorney's office will be able to join us, because I'm sure that there will be questions for them as well. Councilmember Rodriguez.
So I have a question on how is corporate versus mom and pop established or delineated in terms of the ownership?
So we define mom and pop in the rent stabilization ordinance as owners that own 4 rental units or less, plus a single family dwelling. It's also written, the draft ordinance is written in a way so that family trusts are included in the mom and pop definition. So it would protect those, because some families do hold their property in a trust.
Okay.
So corporate owned is not.
Sir, are you able to get on?
Sorry, I'm trying to use my webcam and it sounds like I was on mute the entire time.
Oh, okay. Is this the city attorney representative?
Yes. And, sorry about that.
No problem. Who is this?
This is Deputy City Attorney Elaine Zong.
Great. Thank you so much for being here and being available to answer any questions that Ms. Ortega may want to punt to you.
Are there any examples or circumstances in which an LLC would constitute just for the purposes of, you know, tax or business licenses, that a family would have less than 4 units but still qualify as mom and pop, but register for liability purposes as an LLC?
Sorry, is that a question for me?
Anyone who can answer.
There's currently no exception for LLCs that are.
Has that been explored in terms of, I mean, are you familiar with in terms of real estate practice and as a means from mitigating risk? Is that something that has been explored in terms of that filing and ascertaining whether or not there are examples that can be used to differentiate? Because trusts alone are not sufficiently going to capture that.
So I believe the city attorney attempted to account for that in the ordinance as written. It's in the section 165.06 under relocation assistance. A number 6, it says when the residential real property is a single family dwelling and the owner is a natural person, including natural persons who hold properties in a trust, who owns no more than 4 dwelling units and a single family home on a separate lot, then it's 1 month's rent that was in effect. So again, it goes to if the real property owner is a natural person.
So I guess my question, and the reason why I'm asking is because when I ask the question about an LLC, it's a specific type of filing and ownership, like trust. So my question is there a provision or a process whereby that natural person who might file for the protective indemnification and mitigating risk, files as an LLC, would be eligible to be able to perhaps adjudicate or protect themselves under this ordinance and still have it registered as an LLC? Is there a way of adjudicating or proving that in fact perhaps they're filing? Because when we talk about a trust, and again, I'm going to be explicit here, because a trust and a family trust is one thing and LLC is another, and I just want to make sure that we are clear on the differences.
So what I can say to that is that thus far that hasn't been defined. However, in our recommendations, there are recommendations that would instruct the Rent Adjustment Commission with the assistance of LAHD and the city attorney to adopt rules and regulations to promulgate the intention of this ordinance. So that could be addressed in additional regulations by the Rent Adjustment Commission.
Hello, this is also Noreen Vincent from the City Attorney's Office. I apologize, I was just unmuted. So I believe that whatever form, whether it's an LLC or a trust, that whoever owns it in whatever form they own it, they are still subject to this ordinance. So you would not be able to get away with evicting somebody just because you had an LLC which held title to the property.
But sorry, so Councilmember Rodriguez, if I could just follow up on your question. I think what she was referring to is that there was a difference in the way that a trust was classified that owned a certain number of single family homes or less. And 1 single family home and 4 other units that was held by a trust or by a natural person was provided a lower relocation amount that could be paid out. And so I think basically, Councilmember Rodriguez, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you were basically saying a lot of people own stuff not just as a trust, but also as an LLC, even when they just own 4 units, because it's a way to limit your liability, very common form of ownership of even a small number of units. So in that case, is there a way to ensure that the protections that are being offered to people who have placed their property in a trust is also offered to people who have placed their property into an LLC? Is that?
Yes, I believe that the whole purpose of that was to make sure that the smaller businesses would be characterized and treated in a way that's different. So whether you are somebody who owns a relatively small number of properties and you hold it in a trust, or you hold it as an LLC, I think the idea was to make sure that they are treated in the same way. I thought for a minute you might be asking if somebody had LLCs for every single property, because sometimes people do hold each property in the name of a different LLC. But I think if you're asking the form of ownership, it's really the number of properties that we're looking to make sure that those who have a relatively small number of properties are treated in one way, and those with a large number of properties are treated in a different way. So whether it's by way of trust or by way of LLC.
I understand, Noreen, and thank you. I understand the intent. I'm asking about the explicit policy and whether or not that's conveyed clearly so that it doesn't accidentally exclude or protect the individuals that are those small owners. And that's why I'm asking this question. So what we think and what we know are 2 different things, and I want to be clear on what I know when we're adopting and recommending a policy to advance on this issue. So can someone explicitly let me know what is the John, do you know the answer? Johnny Lee, you're raising your hand.
Madam Chair, is it okay? May I?
Yeah, thank you. You're kind to ask.
Okay, at our last meeting, we made sure that was a concern for all of us that, and we made sure that that was a provision placed in it. When the city attorney is saying, you know, it's just that someone doesn't create a bunch of LLCs, but your specific thing where if I'm an LLC and I own 4, you know, because we're protecting ourselves, you are still under the lower threshold of correct. 1 month versus 3 months. So correct. You're still okay. Mom and pop under that.
So it's still explicit. Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because when we refer to trust, and I just, those things, they're used interchangeably, but they are different. And I want to make sure that we're very clear on what that is. So thank you, John.
So I just wanted to, I want to make sure that our departmental advisors here are agreeing with what the committee members are saying. What Councilmember Lee is saying is accurate and reflected in the text as is. Ms. Vincent or Ms. Ortega, could you please confirm?
Yes, and I'm also going to ask my colleague Elaine, who is also on the call, to join in.
The text just says natural person. So if we want to be clear that the natural person includes the sole member of an LLC, then we could be more explicit with that in the actual draft ordinance.
Would you recommend that we add that additional phrase in order for it to be clear? I'm asking the city attorneys.
Yes.
I'd like to make that recommendation.
That was the direction given at the last meeting.
I'll second Ms. Rodriguez's recommendation.
Great. Okay, I'm comfortable with that change. So we can add, what is the phrase that you want us to add? This is a question directed to the city attorneys.
I believe it was the sole member of an LLC.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to add, I just want to be very clear about what we're adding here. Give me 1 second. Okay. So looking at the end of that last clause here, this provision This provision shall apply for non-RSO single-family homes owned by a natural person when the landlord owns 4 or fewer rental units and a single-family home on a separate lot, inclusive of natural persons who have their properties in a trust or LLC. All right? Okay. Great. So we can amend. So we're going to recommend that we amend the language in that way. Let's move to Councilmember Blumenfield before we move on. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry, just one moment. You're done, right, Ms. Rodriguez? Great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. No, and I think doing work here in terms of expanding just cause is really important, and it's especially as the COVID protections are waning, it's important to have something like this. I do want to make sure, of course, though, that as we do this, we don't disincentivize housing. We want to make sure that the folks are continuing to build. And so I have a couple of questions, and particularly, and so I'm all for doing the just cause, the question, but there's some pieces around the edges that I have questions about. And one of them has to do with a medium-term lease. If someone has a short-term lease that's agreed upon by a landlord and a tenant, like a 3-month lease for a student or traveling nurse or something, like that'll ultimately convert to month, I'm worried that we're eliminating that possibility. Would a just cause eviction protection apply, in effect, creating a situation where short-term rental agreements are null and void because the only way to evict someone is for just cause reasons? What happens to medium-term leases?
Part of what we endeavored to do, or what we were instructed to do, was to fill in any gaps in protections, and tenants in RSO units are protected the first day that they're tenants. So there has been discussion about a required term for a lease. If there's a short-term lease and both the tenant and the landlord agree to it, and the tenant moves as agreed in the lease, then there's never relocation assistance for a voluntary move out.
Right. Obviously, the question is, you're a traveling nurse. You're gone for 3 months. You want to lease out your place while you're gone. You lease it out, and then the person does not want to leave at that point. You signed a 3-month lease or a 6-month lease. Is your only recourse under this to pay a relocation fee because you want your apartment back or your house back, your condo or whatever?
As written, and there was debate about this from prior meetings.
Sorry, one second. Mr. Verano, you're not on mute.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
No problem. No problem.
As written, the tenant protections would apply immediately. So if the tenant doesn't voluntarily vacate, then first of all, a landlord would need one of the enumerated legal reasons to evict them.
Right.
And the tenant no fault reasons would require relocation assistance.
And
so
would this also apply, let's say, to a Airbnb if you rent your house for the weekend?
Well, if you rent your house for the weekend, that's less than a 30-day tenancy. So that's not, we don't consider that a tenancy.
Okay, so if you rent it for 30 days, I guess this is a concern, I think, for me, which is short-term leases have a place in our rental market, and it helps a lot of people get by. We have actors who go off on shoots. We have traveling nurses. We have all sorts of folks who literally rent out their condo. And this is a real situation where, one of the painful stories. I was approached by a family during COVID, and I mean, the COVID's a whole separate issue, but they had, when COVID hit, they went to go live with their parents and rented out their condo. And they had kids, but then when the school year started, they wanted to go back to their condo. These were people of fairly modest means. But the people they had rented it to for the short term did not want to move at that point, and they were out, and it was a very hard luck, painful story. And so I worry about this not the ability to not have short-term leases, which is effectively what this would do. There's no reason for anyone to ever have a short-term lease if you can't evict, if it's not relevant. So
I wonder. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, one way to consider this would be to have the just cause not kick in immediately, but kick in upon the end date of the first lease. So whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or a year, there's another advantage to something like that, which is we want leases. Part of the problem right now, a lot of renters, they can't get leases because landlords don't want to give them a lease. They want to go month to month and they can raise the rent. When you have a lease, your rent is protected during the time of that lease. So I'll put it out there as an alternative, which would be to have just cause, which is really important, but to do it when it, not have it kick in until the first lease expires, so that there is that lease, there is that window where someone can have a short-term lease and not have to worry about a relocation fee, and if it's a mutually agreed upon short-term lease.
So if I may interject here, I wonder if up to a 6-month period might capture what you're trying to capture, Mr. Blumenfield, and your concerns. And it's really where someone is trying to rent out their home and then move back into it, right? We're not trying to encourage people to have multiple short-term leases. We want long-term leases. We want long-term.
Well, ideally, we want long-term leases, but I'm just saying that there are situations where it's logical to have a short-term lease, and it makes sense, and it's not a bad thing. It just needs to be mutually agreed upon. And I like the idea of encouraging leases, because otherwise all we're going to see is month to month immediately. Why would a landlord go to a long-term lease if they can, I mean, 6 months might be a decent compromise. I'm just, I'm spitballing here, but it does feel like there needs to be something to protect short-term leases, particularly for folks who are owner-occupied, who have their own place. But I do see it also, like, for example, for ADUs, there's that situation as well where you may not want to rent your ADU out all year. You may want to rent it out in the summers or something like that. That's a very intimate thing where it's part of your house. So I see some areas where it would make sense to kick in the just cause a little bit later in the process after that conversion. But I see a lot of people have their hands up about this, so I'll hold back for the moment.
Okay, Mr. Lee, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bloomfield, I have an amendment that I believe would cover your concern. You and I, we introduced a motion that was included in the first report, but then unfortunately it was taken out. I think if I can add it, I'd like to add an amendment, and you let me know if this covers your concerns. I move that the draft ordinance R22-0414 be amended to include the following into section 165.04, that the tenant has not continuously and lawfully occupied the residential real property for 12 months. I think it's very important, so that's the amendment. I think it's very important. We've heard from the callers. I think it's very important that we put in renters protections before the eviction moratorium ends. But like you, Councilmember Blumenfield, we also need to make sure that our actions don't cause a a bigger problem. The problems that you identified, and the problems being that we don't want to create a situation where, you know, we are discouraging investment or opportunities like the ones that you spoke about, or reduce our housing stock in any way. And so I think that 1 year before, because I'm all for universal just cause. I'm all for expanding just cause. But I think that given that 1 year, I don't want to hurt tenants. I see a possible unintended consequence is that if I'm a landlord, I'm more willing to possibly take a chance on someone who might have a lower score or might have other reasons, because I know I have that 1 year grace period. Whereas if I have that, if I'm that 1 year just cause, I'm going to make sure that, you know, everything is perfect for every single tenant, and that's not a situation that I want to cause by creating this. And I'm all for expanding just cause, but my amendment addresses that issue, Councilmember Blumenfield, and I hope I can get your support on that.
I think I hear you, Mr. Blumenfield, on these concerns, and I think we've seen how the 1 year continuous tenancy has impacted 1482 buildings, AB 1482 buildings, which is a state level tenant protections bill that will be in effect for the next 6 years. And to me, I think the year-long continued tenancy requirement might be challenging in terms of what the outcomes are that we're trying to get to. I think a 6-month threshold that says something like, relocation assistance is not required for rentals up to 6 months for the owner move-in. And if it's pre-discussed between the landlord and the tenant, that to me gets at the challenges that you were bringing up in your discussion, and I think would still enable us to move forward with significantly strengthening our tenant protections, which is, I think, what our goal was in thinking through this in the first place. But I'm less comfortable with the 12-month continued tenancy requirement. I want to open up the floor for Ms. Rodriguez.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to see if I can try and help Mary, I think, some of the concerns and address it here. Because I hear what Mr. Blumenfield was saying in his example. And if we talk about, if we set it based on the premise of the expiration of the first lease, whatever term that is, that addresses it. So because it essentially, again, and it's not fixating a particular amount of time, but it helps to address that there are circumstances with which we need flexibility in how people contractually obligate themselves. Look, we're in Los Angeles. We have plenty of people who live here for short-term basis and then travel because they're on production. We have a variety of circumstances where we have to allow this to have some flexibility for it to make sense. And so that's what my recommendation would be, is to create that it's based on the expiration of that first lease.
That's exactly what I was suggesting. I mean, for that very reason, I'm comfortable with the year, but I'm also comfortable with what I suggested, which is the term of the lease, because then that term could be 3 months. But frankly, if they want to make it a year, if they want to make it 2 years, that's great, because the longer the lease is, the more protected that tenant is from rent increases and from everything else. The landlords tend to push for the short term because they want to be able to jack up the rent. It's the longer leases benefit, as I understand it, the tenants. So making it the length of that first lease, to me, makes sense, because you're actually creating an incentive to have a lease, versus if we kick it in right away, there's no incentive. Pretty much everything is month to month.
This is so different from how the RSO Just Cause operates. I'm going to throw it over to Ms. Ortega, who has her hand raised, to provide feedback on this. And I also would invite the city attorney to weigh in as well. This is a very, very different way of thinking about how Just Cause provisions come into play. And I'm honestly having a little bit of trouble understanding the implications of it on protections for tenants. How would it impact the security and long-term impact, long-term kind of stability of tenants, which is ultimately what we're trying to get to here. How would what council members Blumenfield, Rodriguez, and Lee have been discussing impact that question, which is ultimately the goal of all of our work here. So I want to just center us back in our goal, which is we want to create tenant stability. We want to create, tenant protections at a time when people are feeling unstable. How would thinking about this at the end of a first lease agreement impact that?
Thank you, Councilwoman. I would just caution that in Los Angeles, lots of renters don't have written leases. They're still considered to have verbal leases, but you really can't prove a case when you're looking into a tenant complaint or a situation with a particular landlord and tenant. So we just need to be aware that a lot of people don't have written leases. So from that point of view, it would be clearer and more understandable to set a specific time frame, like 6 months or 1 year, whatever you want to set it at. It's ultimately a policy decision. And you are correct, Councilwoman Rahman, also that there is no such provision in the rent stabilization ordinance. I think it would just get messy for landlords and tenants to understand if you say at the expiration of the first lease in those many cases where there is not a written lease.
Thank you. City Attorney, representatives, can you please weigh in here?
Go ahead, Nori.
No, I was going to say, I think that this really is a policy issue. I think the point made by Ms. Ortega is a good one, a valid one, because you have to first determine what the length of the lease is. And I think there are some disadvantages to doing that based on what you said, but in terms of how you want to do this, whether you want it to read the exact way that the RSO currently reads, or whether you choose to pick, the year, the 1 year, the 6 months, I do think that is a policy call for you to be able to make. Elaine, I don't know if you have any other thoughts about this?
I would agree.
Mr. Lee?
Madam City Attorney, can we just make it? I mean, I think a written lease protects the tenant from a landlord, stating whatever they want, whatever 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line. Can't we require as a city that there be a written lease rather than a verbal lease? Can't we legally require a written lease?
I don't know, Elaine, are you able to opine on that, or would you need some time to determine whether we can actually require, and then there may be actually some tenants who are not particularly interested in signing a lease. So, but Elaine, do you have any thoughts? Would the city be able to essentially require that everybody have a written lease?
I'm not prepared to answer that on the floor.
I think that's something we could certainly look into and be prepared to report back to you.
Okay.
Well, and I mean, in some ways, if you don't have a written lease, then essentially that means you're month to month, right? And then your lease is a month. So in that case, under this amendment, you would just cause would kick in right away after a month. So we don't have to require the lease. It's going to be in the landlord's incentive to put that lease in. Otherwise, just cause is applying right away, which gets back to the renter protection, which is what we're trying to get after here. So, I mean, I'm comfortable with that. And yes, a lot of folks would end up falling in to just cause pretty much right away. But at least we would have an avenue for folks who wanted to have a lease to have a longer period of time. So that seems like not necessarily a bad thing in terms of, I mean, it gets more toward, Ms. Rahman, what you're trying to get at, which is more people getting just cause immediately. And if you don't have a lease and the lease is a month by de facto.
But what if you have like a 2-year lease? Then you don't have just cause provisions kick in until the end of that 2-year lease. Like, how would it impact somebody who had?
Well, you can't be evicted during your lease for any non-just cause, right? Because you're under the protection of your lease. So it's not like you can get it. If you have a 2-year lease, you can't be evicted after a year, unless you don't pay rent. I mean,
could you? I mean, would having a lease be the same on being under the provisions of a lease? Does that entitle you to the same protections as what you'd have under this?
I think Councilman Blumenfield is correct. A tenant can't be evicted during the term of their lease. So for whatever that duration is, they would have protections. And if it's...
Yes, assuming that they have, for example, complied with the terms of the lease, then that would be correct. The landlord then has agreed that for that 1-year, 2-year period of time, that property has been leased to the tenant. So there are some protections to having the lease.
Aren't there more protections under a lease than there are without a lease? I mean, under a lease, it's yours contractually for that period of time.
And could you build in provisions into a lease that undermine, one thinks of a lease as a period of time that you get to hold on to your apartment, but could you build into the lease agreement now that if the landlord wanted you out, that they would not have to, that they could do that? Is that possible to do under a lease agreement, or is a lease agreement, guaranteed stability?
Under the provisions of the RSO, you can't enforce agreements that are counter to the law. So, and let's keep in mind that relocation assistance only applies for no-fault evictions. So it's correct that a tenant who has a lease can't be evicted for no-fault reasons throughout the term of that lease. Even if
they are in a non-RSO unit, because that's really what we're talking about here.
Yes, even if they're in a non-RSO unit, a lease is a contract for X term.
Yes, that's correct.
Bob, are you doing a motion?
I want to let people talk it out, but what was on the table, I think both Ms. Rodriguez and I were of a similar mind, which is the just cause protections should kick in after your first lease expires. So that you have
with that, whether it's a year or a lease agreement. I just want to protect against the things that you're talking about. Being a city like Los Angeles, of people doing short-term rentals, coming home, and then finding a situation where they, have a situation where they can't go back into their own homes on short-term rentals. So I'm with you. So I'm comfortable with whether it's a year or the lease agreement, whichever.
So the question I have here is, let's say it's a longer than year lease agreement or a year plus lease agreement. At the end of that first lease agreement, you you're saying at the end of that first lease agreement, you would not have just cause provisions, that you could end the lease agreement, you could move that person out, but then any time beyond that, you would have it? I'm not sure I'm following. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
so at least that's the way I'm envisioning it, which is you have a 3-month lease, and at the end of that 3-month lease, you can move in somebody else, you can move in your mother, you can move back into your apartment, but the time is up and everybody understands that's the term. When the lease is over, you then move to a month to month, and once you do that, you're now a permanent resident essentially, and we have all the just cause protections that we're talking about. So we never end up in that situation where, you know, grandma who's been living in the place for 30 years is all of a sudden being kicked out because of some reason or whatever, all the horrible stories that we hear. But we still have this idea of a short-term lease or a lease I like a long-term lease because leases work to the tenant's advantage. But you have a period of time where you can agree upon this is the time that I'm occupying that unit. Once that time period is over, you're now moved into a month-to-month. And once you're month-to-month, you have just cause protection because you're open-ended. You shouldn't be kicked out for any other reason.
And it's my understanding that after, if a building's over 15 years old, after the first year, 1482 kicks in and provides just cause. So
you're saying, so even if you had a longer lease, you can't go more than a year anyway, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, I didn't know that, but that's
a year. So that's why I'm proposing the 1 year so that we don't have that issue. So that's the only issue I see with what you're proposing.
right. I guess what we're proposing is a little bit more tenant focused in the sense that the state kicks in after a year, but if somebody's on a month-to-month lease or doesn't sign a lease, we're saying, okay, well then you're going to get the protections right away. The only exemptions we're saying is if you have a agreed upon time period that's less than a year, that you should be allowed to have that time period.
So in this situation, Mr. Blumenfield, like let's say you had a 10-month lease for some reason.
Right.
You could pay that rent for 10 months, and at the end of that 10 months, if your landlord decided not to renew that lease, you would have to move out and you wouldn't incur the just cause provisions?
Correct.
And you wouldn't get any assistance for doing that?
No, but you know going in that you're signed a 10-month lease. I'm some actor is going on a 10-month shoot and wants to rent their apartment for 10 months, and it works out with my schedule that I want 10 months apartment. I can do that, and then there's not that, I can't hold that person hostage at the end of it.
I guess my question here is really like the way I'm understanding this, it would basically, in order to avoid just cause protections incurring in a case, a landlord, no matter what the lease period, would be incentivized to move you out at the end of your first lease agreement and not keep you beyond that, right?
I don't know why is that?
Because if you don't want to pay relocation, or if you don't want to have a just cause provision applied to your tenancy, at the end of any, like let's say you have a regular year-long lease, and you're saying anything for non-RSO units, you sign a year-long lease. At the end of that first lease, you don't have just cause applying to you because you're at the end of your first lease. So you'd be like, okay, great, let's come on to the next tenant. And so you could continually change over your lease agreement at whatever, a year, 2 years, whatever it is.
Madam Chair, I don't see any reason why, if I have somebody with a lease and they're paying, why I would want to find a new tenant. I want to keep them as someone. The reason for just cause is so if I decide to, before the lease is over and I move in, then I have to pay to relocate that person. But if I'm a landlord and the lease is over, why would I have any incentive to do just cause on someone if they're paying the rent, if they agree to the increased, whatever, 3% or whatever it is that they're proposing? I just don't think that's a scenario that would. I don't see what the incentive for a landlord to get rid of somebody.
You'd lose a lot of rental income because your unit would be vacant while you had to turn it over and all of that. But, most leases are going to be a year, and after a year, just cause is going to kick in, regardless of if it's a 1 year because of the state law. So we're really just talking about whether or not you can have a shorter term lease of any period of time, whether we're going to allow that kind of an arrangement.
Right. Okay.
Most of the people that we're worried about they're on month-to-month leases, and that is going to have just cause kick in right away.
Or no lease, yeah.
Or no lease, or that's going to kick in right away. Or they've been a tenant for years, and we're worried about them overall. We're not. I don't think the problem is people getting leases for less than a year and being kicked out. I don't know. I think that people should be allowed to have short-term leases.
Sure. Ms. Rodriguez, and then I would love to hear from Councilmember Harris-Dawson as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with Mr. Blumenfield, and I think what we're talking about is, I understand, Ms. Rahman, I understand the concerns, but I also think, and I know we're talking about an extreme worst case scenario, but I think there's a disincentive for landlords to be with regularity trying to turn over. There's no incentive for that in this, to keep turning over the property, evicting people, and it doesn't work. It's not even financially feasible that I could see. So I just think, I think it's a reasonable amendment that would enable and create, fulfill the intent of what we're trying to do, and still retain the protections of, I think a contractual obligation, once it's fulfilled, those are the terms of the agreement. Whether you agree to it for a year, whether you agree to it for a shorter term, it's an agreed contractual obligation upon two parties. And as we're saying, when we're trying to capture, those that are most vulnerable, it's the ones that are without those contractual obligations, quite frankly.
Yeah, could I was wondering to hear what would be, what might be some of the ramifications of having this, if the department could speak to that.
I would say that it's always best to provide clarity to landlords and tenants. It's always, you just need to make the rules clear so that people know them and can follow them. And it's true, if there's no lease, then it's a month to month. So presumably the relocation would apply for no fault after the first month. We were originally charged with filling in the gaps, so that is less generous than what's in the RSO, but I'm hearing the concerns. I just think that the more clarity we can provide, the better. So you might want to amend it a little bit more to say, if this is the way the committee wants to go, to say that it doesn't kick in until the end of the first lease or 12 months, whichever is less. So that would be a maximum period of 12 months. After all, more than 12 months is no longer a short-term situation. Or 6 months, whatever the committee feels is the best policy. Ultimately, it's a policy decision. But if we can tie it to something, a specific known time frame, that would help us provide clarity.
All right.
We want to expand.
Could I or did you want to speak to this question? I also was wondering, is any of this in terms of short-term leases, how does it comport with our short-term rental ordinance? Does it have any conflict with it? Does, are the kinds of leases that Mr. Blumenfield has been talking about, how are those currently governed here in Los Angeles right now? Is that a common kind of agreement? Is that allowed? How many cases is this coming up in? The travel nurse who's gone for 3 months and wants to move back afterwards.
Would you like me to answer now?
Sure.
So this is not an issue for the 650,000 rent stabilized units. In fact, for a couple of reasons. One is that their protections kick in immediately, and secondly, short-term rentals are illegal in rent stabilized units. So we're really talking about this applying to the non-RSO units. And what the committee is talking about is special rules for post-78 rental units that are a significant number of units. So the rules are different for the RSO, and RSO tenants will continue to have greater protections than non-RSO tenants.
Short-term rentals are stays of 30 days.
Hold on, I was asking Ms. Sewell if she wanted to speak right now.
Ms. Sewell wants to do the risky thing of asking her own staff person a question that she should probably know the answer to herself. But when we talk about just cause, we don't mean replacing one tenant with another tenant. Aren't we just referring to owner occupancy or property manager occupancy?
Correct. Yes, so we're talking again, as we said, no fault eviction. So it can be primarily owner occupancy, sometimes resident manager occupancy, which are getting amended a little bit with these recommendations. Also what we commonly call Ellis, when they want to demolish or remove a rental unit from the rental housing market. Probably the most frequent thing we find though is owner or family occupancy. So I think that when landlords rent out their rental units, unless they specifically have a short-term agreement, they're not looking to remove their tenant. This would protect those tenants who, again, these are no fault reasons, who for no fault of their own are suddenly being asked to move by the landlord, perhaps because the landlord has an unexpected circumstance where they need to move in a family member.
Mr. Lee?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry, Mr. Harris-Dawson, sorry. You didn't have your hand up.
Thank you. Well, you had called on me earlier, but a series of people spoke. I just had a question because we're pretty into the weeds on this stuff. So, I thought Mr. Blumenfeld brought a compelling example forward, but there were a couple questions I had about the example that he had. And the first one is, an owner reoccupation of their own unit is in fact a just cause, right? So it's kind of a moot point in the example that he gave, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or 15 months, if I understand the policy correctly. Ms. Ortega?
Well, but yes, it's a just cause, but it's a cause which normally requires relocation assistance to the tenant, unless the tenant voluntarily vacates.
You got to pay $20,000.
Got it. Okay, so again, I think that that's a compelling case. I guess when you get to a year, it gets in terms of Mr. Lee's proposal. When you gets to a year, it does get troubling. In certain parts of the city, and once you get into this business of trying to say what landlords do or don't do, or what tenants do or don't do, there are far too many of both categories to predict all the things that they do. But one fairly common practice here in South LA is about month 9 of a year-long lease, landlords start advertising apartments that are occupied. And then they see what the market says, and then they slap as large a rent increase as they can. The person doesn't pay it. That person either moves voluntarily, or they end that person's tenancy. So I've found lots of cases where the idea that I do think it is typical for landlords, if they have a good paying tenant, to keep them, and they don't have any incentive. But there are plenty of examples, especially in the corporate-owned apartments, plenty of examples where landlords, as a routine matter, try to re-up at the end of leases to get higher rent. So there is an incentive for them to do that. And so once you start getting to a year, it begins to get troubling. I mean, that's all I got to say, so we can follow. But I would just say to committee members, this idea that we're going to predict everything that people do or what their incentives are is, I mean, that's kind of a fool's errand, because I just don't think it's possible for us to do that. So let's, I would encourage us to try to come up with what's reasonable. I think Mr. Blumenfield raises a good example, particularly when you're inside of 6 months. After that, it seems like it gets tricky. That's all I got.
So I'm just gonna interject here and say, I also earlier had stated that 6 months felt like it captured a lot of the situations that you were talking about, Mr. Blumenfield. And so if that's a comfortable bucket for this, we can put in that relocation assistance wouldn't be required for rentals of up to 6-month leases if this is agreed to in advance by the landlord and the tenant, and if it's for that, for the situation that you mentioned where the owner's coming back into it. And I think if that's comfortable for everyone, and I think it accommodates a lot of the situations that the cases that you were mentioning, Mr. Blumenfield, I think this bucket of 6 months really does accommodate all of that. No, Mr. Lee.
Yeah, so obviously the intent of Councilmember Bloomfield, Councilmember Rodriguez, and myself, we're not trying to protect the people that Councilmember Marquise Harris Dawson is talking about, the bad actors. And, we're just trying to make sure that in the city of Los Angeles, we want to expand universal, just cause. We are 100% with you. There's nothing here. We are just trying to make sure. If we then make it 6 months, then, we're going to see a lot of 6-month leases with people raising rent after 6 months. I'm fine with that, but I don't, if we can do the leases, which is fine as well. 1 year, I just feel is much cleaner. But if you want to do the leases, that's fine. I just want to protect against, we live in an area where there are people who, like the scenario that's been told over and over here again during this meeting. And to protect against that someone just doesn't say, no, I don't want to, after the agreed amount of time. And also the one where landlords aren't willing to take an opportunity to take a chance on somebody, because if just cause in 1 year, they don't have any ability to deal with that tenant. And if, so if I'm a landlord, I'm gonna pick someone, absolutely A+ right across the board, which I think we're trying to protect people here. So I'm trying to protect. If you want to do it 6 months,
yeah,
unintended consequences is that people are going to raise rent after 6 months then, or the same thing that Councilman Harris Dawson was talking about advertising. Okay, then they advertise at month 4. There's no way, unfortunately, to protect against every single thing that might come up. We're not trying to do anything. We're not trying to protect. We're just trying to protect the the market here so that short-term rentals are still, you know, people have the ability to still do them, and not the fear that they're going to come home from a business trip or something, and then the person just like, no, and then, oh, okay, now just cause because, you know, comes in, and then I have to pay this person, you know, whatever amount of money. So I'm comfortable with Councilman Blumenfield. I would like the amendment heard on the 1 year. I don't know if I have a second. If I don't, that's.
I'm going to move on. I think I'm going to move to say that we can, you know, I would be more comfortable with the 6-month provision here, and you know, I'd like to move that we have a, you know, that relocation assistance isn't required for rentals up to 6 months. If this is agreed upon in advance by landlord and tenant, and in the case of owner move-in, as Mr. Blumenfield has stated.
I would like my amendment on the 1 year. Do I have a second?
Well, I'm asking if I have a second so we can vote on these. This would be for a 6-month. Okay. All right.
So, what I think is the middle spot is the length of the lease, maybe up to a year, but not just giving it as a year, because we don't want to automatically give a year, because a lot of folks are going to do a 3-month lease, and you don't want to kick that in. And frankly, we want to capture the vast majority of folks who don't have a lease at all and get them just cause right away. That's the vast majority of people that we're talking about. And if the landlords are suddenly going to give them a lease, God bless them, they're going to get a lease and they're going to not have any rent increase for a while. I can say, you know, even though I don't have a problem with even more than a year, because I think the leases are a good thing, if you want to say up to a year, but a lot of them won't be, I'm comfortable with that too, which is what I think Ms. Rodriguez put out there as well. So I'd offer that as a compromise. I think it's a compromise between, you know, the nice thing is I think we're all in the pocket here. We're all talking about vastly expanding just cause, and it's just a question of when that kicks in and is there that moment. So I guess I'd put that out there as an option.
Okay, Monica, second. What was your amendment, Councilmember Blumenfield? I apologize.
It's what we've been talking about, and I want to make sure I'm framing it right, which is just cause kicks in at the end of the lease, but the lease can be no longer than a year. At the end of a year, just cause is automatically regardless, and that's what in response to what you all are saying, regardless of the lease term. So just cause kicks in at the end of your lease or a year, whichever comes first. And that will help, because the state law, keep in mind, only applies to buildings less than 15 years. So all those new buildings will now have this just cause protection under our city provision that wouldn't otherwise.
Correct. That everything is, we're expanding it to everything, whether it was built last year, 2 years ago, 15 years ago, we're expanding it.
Every building will have just cause at the end of their lease, or up to 12 months, or if they're on a month to month, then it kicks in at the end of the month, because that's the term of their lease, is a month.
All right. So why don't we can take a vote on this. I will say that, you know, this is a leftover from what has been happening in council over the past few months. And my hope is that as we move forward through the work of this committee, that the processes can be a little bit smoother, that we're able to make decisions with data in front of us. Like, I think this has the support of the committee to move forward. I feel uncomfortable moving forward with it because I feel like I don't understand what the ramifications are going to be for tenants with this. And I understand what they would be based on the experience of the RSO and what the housing department is recommending on the basis of their reports for what was originally in the council file. But it sounds like this has the support of the committee, so I'm comfortable taking a vote on this. I'm going to be voting no because I feel like we need more decisions. And I just want to say, and this is a commitment to all my fellow committee members, that moving forward, I hope that we're not making decisions in this way without time to have the housing department report back on what the implications are going to be for tenants as we move through this, as we consider various options, and as we think through what the implications of those options are for vulnerable tenants in the city, which is what we're really out here to work on. So
if I may interject, Ms. Rahman, that's what this committee process is about, is having this dialogue and exchanging in these conversations. We're not always going to be in perfect alignment, but I think we're finding the balance in all of this.
No, I know. My comment was only because we have been discussing this in this committee, but not really discussing it fulsomely in the past. And
this is my first time in this conversation.
I know.
So
that's the challenge here. But anyway,
what I will say is that I believe this is exactly what the committee process is about. If we want to have a report back on what the implications are once we implement something, because as you implement new rules, you're not going to have data about what the effects are. And so unless it's fully baked by one individual without the input of others. And so that's what this committee process is about. I'm not sure what else to do, but.
Sorry, go ahead, Councilmember.
Yeah, I think, I certainly appreciate Ms. Rodriguez's point. I think, I wish more committees were like this, where you had actual debates. Having said that, debates and back and forth, and we come up with something better. That's the theory of committees that I think is supposed to work. What we have before us now is the maker of the motion has something before her that she's saying to us. She has no idea what the implications are. And so I haven't seen on any committee, good or bad. And so I think it's, I would just suggest to the chair that I think it's completely reasonable for you to ask for the data that you think you need in order to have an opinion about this, rather than just sort of rush to do this today. And that's just my 2 cents. In all the time I've been in any committee, I've not seen a chair's motion changed into something that they say they don't understand. That's that.
And since we're all interjecting, I'll make a few comments as well, and I totally appreciate, Ms. Rahman, what you're saying. I had some concerns about the implications of going, of vesting the just cause immediately, that I don't think have been studied. And we really don't know.
They have, because that's how the RSO operates. And so we have a whole volume of data that looks at how apartments that have just cause operate, because this is built exactly like the existing provision. So this would be an expansion of that. And
I mean, I respectfully, I disagree to some extent that it's not an apples to apples comparison. The non-RSO units are operating very differently from even the very fact that short-term leases are illegal under RSOs. So that's not even, it doesn't that whole thing hasn't been factored in. It has a different impact, especially on new construction as well. There's a lot of things that are impacted by when we're moving forward than the RSO. But that being said, I would be with you to just let's delay this and get more information. But the problem is we need to act quickly.
That was exactly my point earlier, is that the timeline of this was not determined by me. It's not been, I think this has been frustrating for me. And I would have loved to have had, like I said, this fulsome discussion on these issues 6 months ago, allowed for our departments to report back in full on the implications of various versions of this. And I'm fine. Let's move ahead with a vote on the amendment that you made, Councilmember Blumenfield, and let's move forward here. So let's take, Mr. Rano, can you call the roll on this?
May I just interject, just so that I understand what the amendment is, if you can restate it?
just cause protections kick in, come to play at the end when a lease expires, or after 12 months, whichever comes first.
And I just want to confirm, there was a second for that amendment?
Second.
And I also believe there was an amendment on the LLC language. Is that correct, Madam Chair?
Yeah, as amended, that was included. So we can use it with including the LLC language amendment.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. And are you also requesting LAHD report back on the ramifications of these amendments? Is that correct, or?
No, just
the two amendments. Okay. Okay, call the roll, Madam Chair.
I can clarify.
Yes, please.
That the LLC was on Section A, which we already adopted, correct? Yes. We already took a vote on A. So this is on B, correct?
No, it's on B.
Okay.
Shall I call the roll, Madam Chair?
Because it would be for the differential relocation payments for mom and pops versus other landlords, for single family owned landlords. So yeah, call the roll, Mr. Lanning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Rahman.
No.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson.
No.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
This item is approved as amended. 3 ayes, 2 noes.
Okay, so now let's move to 13C. And could we have LAHD's presentation on 13C? So this is, again, 2 additional protections, and you're going to be discussing those.
Correct. So 13C provides enhanced protections to cover the gaps that will be there when the COVID protections get lifted. There's 2 main ones. The first we're calling the economic displacement ordinance, where when landlords raise the rent more than the CP.
Ms. Ortega, just give me 1 second. Mr. Verano, do we need to vote on 13B as amended, or are we fine with our current vote?
We are fine with our current vote, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. I apologize, Ms. Ortega. Please continue.
Okay, so the economic displacement ordinance would apply when a landlord of a non-RSO property, and also these properties are the properties that are newer than 15 years and not covered by the Tenant Protections Act. That's who this basically applies to. So when a landlord wishes to raise the rent more than the CPI plus 5% or up to 10%, the tenant would have a choice whether they can elect to stay with that rental and pay the increase, or they could inform their landlord that they can't afford that, and in that case, the landlord would need to pay relocation assistance to the tenant. This has also been under discussion in prior meetings, and the desire of the committee was to provide a somewhat more reasonable relocation amount. So the recommendation before the committee today is that the relocation amount would be 3 times the fair market rent plus moving costs of $1,411. Just for example, the fair market rent for a 1-bedroom is $1,747. For a 2-bedroom, it's $2,222. So the relocation amount for a 2-bedroom unit would be $8,077. There's also an exemption carved out here for individually owned single-family homes, where the relocation assistance would be capped at 1 month's rent. This economic displacement ordinance would apply to and protect approximately 84,000 rental units in the city that are newer than 15 years. So those units built since 2008. So that was the first recommendation having to do with economic displacement. The second recommendation has to do with setting a threshold for evictions. And this would expand eviction protections for all rental units by setting a threshold for rental arrears. The recommendation in the Housing Department's report is to make that 1 month's fair market rent. that a tenant would need to owe before the landlord could proceed with an eviction action. So that is basically the expanded enhanced protections in our report. We also have a request for approval to do some administrative work and execute a sole source contract with Partners in Diversity in order to hire temporary paralegal staff to assist us with the upcoming surge in new applications for evictions and so forth that may come up as the moratorium gets lifted on February 1st. So that's a summary of the expanded protections for economic displacement and the eviction threshold.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ortega. And I would just request members of the committee, if you want to speak on something, if you could raise your hand, and if you're done speaking, to remove your hand being raised, because it has been a little challenging to see who wants to speak and who doesn't, and people are speaking over each other. So it would just be easier if people were able to raise their hands. Councilmember Blumenfield, go ahead.
Just a question. You said that the threshold for eviction payment would be 1 month's rent. I thought it was the median of 1 month's rent. Is it literally the person's rent, or is it a dollar figure?
I'm sorry if I was unclear. It's the fair market rent for the unit size. So there's a set rent for 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, etc.
I think that's an important point so that works to the advantage. If you have a lower rent than 1 month, then you're actually getting more than 1 month's worth. And if you're in a luxury place, you're getting less, which is more equitable. So just to be clear, it's not 1 month's rent, it is the fair market value, which in this case is $1,700 for a 1 bedroom and $2,200 for a 2 bedroom, etc. Got it. Thank you.
It's one figure for the entirety of LA Metro. I know there was some confusion about whether it be different figures based on your zip code, and I know they do offer that, but you're saying one figure for the entire city, right?
Correct. And I would just add that the county cancel that. Never mind.
Questions? Any other committee members? Okay. I guess we can move forward. Oh, Ms. Rodriguez.
Thank you. I do want to, before we adopt, wanted to request and seek continuing this one item for a report back. And my concern stems from the fact that when on the burden that has been placed on so many small homeowners, property owners that have been landlords, and how they've been affected through the course of the pandemic. And I think about it in the context of being the daughter of immigrants who, in their creation of generational wealth, how there have been circumstances that have burdened so many families through the course that we've even seen through the course of the pandemic. And I'm sensitive to it because of my own personal family story, when my father decided to rent out our childhood home, and then subsequently decided we made things way too complicated in the city. So he decided, he's like, I can't do this. And he was charging below market rent to a family who then unfortunately exploited a lot of trust. And so we have certain circumstances that I think we have to create that balance and strike a balance that is responsible, because not everybody, as we've indicated very clearly, not everybody is in the state of corporate entities. And there's been a lot of burden that has been borne and carried by private property owners through the course of everything that we've been doing. And I just want to make sure that we're being responsible and thoughtful and considerate about people's abilities how we manage this and mitigate the implications of what we've just been going through for the last 3 years, how we manage this going forward. So I wanted to suggest and seek an instruction to the Housing Department with the assistance of the CLA, City Attorney, and other relevant departments to report back on an amended formula for determining the qualification for the relocation assistance exemption outlined in recommendation I3 in order to capture mom and pop natural person landlords of small multifamily rentals and explore creating a household income cap to qualify for relocation assistance, so that we can assure that it's the vulnerable that we're protecting and not those that perhaps are financially accomplished, for lack of a better word, are exploiting the same protections of what we're intended to do for the very poor working families that so often are that's really what we're trying to get to the crux of.
Yeah. So I'm very aware, Ms. Rodriguez, of the concern that the entire council has about the challenges facing mom and pop landlords. And I think it's really important, particularly not to repeat what we saw after the 2008 recession, where we saw significant numbers of buyouts of mom and pop landlords, foreclosures of purchases by corporate entities of individual homes, and that have been turned back into the rental market and really have been part of the, become part of a corporatized rental market, which I think is a problem for Los Angeles, something that we have to grapple with, that I think we have some legislative decision-making on already, or some kind of legislative thinking on already, but we need to grapple with more.
And just, out of personal experience, both from, again, just my own family's experience, but even more importantly, what I saw through the economic recession, with, again, you talk about the corporatizing of small mom and pop landlords who get put in arrears, end up losing their property, and oh, by the way, by extension, those very tenants also get evicted because banks are not in the business of being landlords. So we accelerate a lot of the challenges if we're not being very careful and judicious about our approach and who we're trying to protect.
So I was wondering whether we could actually think about doing, again, what the county has done. And I have been discussing this with the housing department already, which is looking at a relief assistance program for mom and pop landlords who are facing impacts from any of these changes. We have funding, I believe, in the city that is available for support for mom and pop landlords who are facing negative impacts through this. And I think it could consider things like the size of the landlord's portfolio, the context of the landlord and their tenants. It could consider whether tenants were low income, whether they were unable to pay rent during the pandemic, whether they have had other rental assistance programs that have been given to them. Because one of the things I really want to emphasize here is that yes, there have been significant protections against evictions during the pandemic. There was also unprecedented funding provided for renters during this period, much of which was paid directly to landlords. There was huge amounts of money that was paid into this market to do exactly what you are talking about here, which was to stabilize the market, to make sure that we didn't penalize landlords in order to support tenants. And this was one of the largest injections of its kind that I've ever seen in this market. And so I think we could think about putting together a fund that would be directed towards exactly the kind of landlord that you're talking about, to make sure that these kinds of landlords are not negatively impacted by this. But I think that what I'd like to see here is for us to move forward on this recommendation from the housing department, and parallel to that, introduce a new fund that we could target exactly towards the kind of landlords that you're talking about.
So my concern is, and Mr. Harris Dawson, and I think Mr. Blumenfield might recall that in the beginning of the pandemic, before you were elected, we had this very conversation, and I refer to it as you know, again, I was cautioning colleagues because before we actually had those protections in place, because you talk about the infusion of funds, we also have to talk about how not every landlord was eligible because there wasn't cooperation from the tenant to enable that landlord to secure those resources. So there are examples of that as well. And so I think it's just, it's a responsible conversation to go forward that if we even talk about, again, if we get to the root of who we're trying to protect here, we're talking about the most economically vulnerable. But we've also seen the exploitation of some of the very wealthy. And so if we talk about a cap in terms of the qualifying, the income cap for qualifying for the assistance in this circumstance, I think we're getting to the root of the population that we're trying to protect. Because there's got to be a threshold at some point when we have these conversations about who are we trying to protect here. And so, I mean, and again, because an
income cap for the renter or for the for the renter that we're trying to protect through these two additional.
So that, and you have high wealth. Look, we have high-end buildings and we have very high wealth circumstances. Is that the root of who we're trying to protect here in this conversation? Are we trying to protect the most vulnerable? And that's where I think I would like to see some consideration of that, because when we talk about, you know, again, not leaving it so open-ended that it captures everybody, but it gets to the root of the populations that we're trying to protect.
Ms. Ortega, do you think you could speak to the question that Ms. Rodriguez is bringing up here around who is being impacted by the economic displacement measure and what they would have to do? I mean, landlords who, for those 84,000 units that you're talking about, landlords could still raise the rent up to 10% or, you know, CPI plus 5%, whatever is higher. Landlords could still, and tenants, if they're able to continue to pay that rent, are still, you know, there's nothing that the landlord has to deal with at that point, right?
Correct. A landlord would notify their tenant that the landlord is seeking to raise the rent by any amount, really. But if it's higher than 10% or the threshold, then the tenant would have the alternative to either accept that rent increase or advise the landlord that they can't afford it and therefore are requesting relocation assistance. We don't know the tenants' incomes right now. We know that they live in units, in the 84,000 units that have been built since 2008.
And I think even for me, as I'm looking at a district that has quite a mix of high income and low income renters, one of the challenges that we're dealing with in my district is just stability, housing stability. And even if a renter is kind of over the cap of what would qualify them for some of the rental assistance programs, they are still not wealthy by any means, and they are facing some real challenges in our current market. So for me, making a distinction between this, which would, for something that would impact a small number of renters, and would work against, again, what is the goal coming out of this moment, which is protecting tenants, stabilizing our housing market, seems a little bit to go against what we're trying to do. But
yeah, I think what we're trying to do though is protect the most vulnerable that are being exposed and making sure that they have the protections and you know, but you know, when we talk about high wealth and we talk about dynamics, this is all encompassing of everybody. And is that really who we're trying to protect? I'm just trying to be responsible in saying, look, let's focus on the categories that we're trying to really address and really kind of hone in on those pieces. Because I think that's really where we need to really concentrate our focus and our energy. And so that's why I'd like to get that report back.
So you're moving to get a report back on, sorry, could you clarify your motion?
To instruct the Housing Department with the assistance of the CLA, City Attorney, and other relevant departments to report back on an amended formula for determining qualification for the relocation assistance exemption outlined in recommendation 1.3 in order to capture mom and pop natural person landlords, as we've described, of small multifamily rentals, and 2, to explore creating a household income cap to qualify for relocation assistance.
So this would be additional to what we're moving forward today?
Correct.
And do you think that, could the department give this back to us in a timely fashion so that as we're crafting the ordinance as we move forward, that we're able to consider this?
I think we would need some time to gather that information. I see Ms. Sewell.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair and Councilwoman Rodriguez. Can't we move on what we're doing today and get this report back later? You can always ban wealthy people later.
Yeah, I think we
would tend to support Ms. Rodriguez on that, but I don't want to hold it up.
Yeah, so I think we could take a both.
Yeah, I think we need a report back on that, and I do think it's not responsible to have this apply to people with unlimited income. So, but I think that can be figured out in the future, and I think we can move on what you put forward to us today.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Harris-Dawson. I just think, you know, it is responsible for us to really hone in on the population that we're trying to serve. And we have a mix of very high wealth individuals that would also be eligible for this. And I think it's, when we're really talking about honing in on, you know, who we're trying to help and protect here, we're talking about a very vulnerable population, not high wealth individuals that would also under this guideline be included. And so that's where I it's really important for us to be mindful of it, because this is all encompassing. And I don't know that that's I don't believe that that's the responsible way to approach it, because again, I've watched a lot of exploitation on all sides, but I think this is something that also puts further at risk the very same individuals that we're trying to protect. And that's when we talk about these smaller ownership folks, they're the ones that will be exposed.
So I think what we're saying is we're going to move these recommendations forward with an additional request for the report back that you're asking for, Ms. Rodriguez, which I'm comfortable with voting on right now. So let's take a vote on that. Mr. Verano, could you please call?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd just like to confirm a second for Councilmember Rodriguez's amendment.
Or addition to the recommendations. And I'll second that.
Can I ask that we take those separately? Because I support her report back.
Okay, so let's take a vote on. Let's move the whole thing together. If there's part of it you don't like, just vote no. I mean,
I'd rather take it separately. I think what Councilmember Rodriguez is proposing is smart and a good idea, but I have issues with the other parts. Let's see. So I'd like.
But this is my point, Mr. Lee. If there's no cap, it doesn't matter what the income level is.
I'm comfortable. I think we can take a vote on this together if that's okay. So, Mr. Rana, could you please call?
I don't know. I as a committee member, I'd like to take these separately. I'd like to bifurcate these two items from each other. Mr. Verano, as a.
Well, you need a second for that.
Is there a second?
I can second.
Madam Chair, would you like me to call the vote on this item separately?
Sure. We're voting on just Ms. Rodriguez's additional report back.
Correct. Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris-Dawson.
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
5 ayes, and this item is approved as amended. And now would you like me to call the vote on the LAHD recommendations, Madam Chair? Okay.
Yes.
Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson.
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
No.
4 ayes and 1 no. This item is approved.
Okay, are we done? Wow.
Hopefully.
We still have 4 items on the desk, Madam Chair.
Okay, so yeah, so we're done with item 13 though, which is remarkable.
Congratulations.
I want to thank you all for your patience. I think Ms. Rodriguez, you may have misunderstood my earlier comment about wanting to have a little bit more time on these. I love the discussion that we have in this forum. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm grateful that we can have it. I just wish that we weren't doing it under the gun of these protections expiring, and hopefully going forward we'll have significantly more time to delve into the implications of all of the changes that we want to be making to both our housing system, our tenant protection system, and our homelessness system. So with that, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is, hold on one second. I believe it's item 1. It's item 1. Mr. Verano, can you read item 1 into the record, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Item number 1 is a Homeless Strategy Committee report relative to the California Shelter Crisis Status Report to the State of California.
Great. So we are going to hear a summary of this report from Megan Falcone. Am I saying your name correct?
You are. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Take it away, Ms. Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Megan Falcone, and I'm with the CAO's Homelessness Group. We also have LASA here. Before you is a status report to the state outlining the city's progress in addressing the shelter crisis declared by the city on April 17, 2018. Pursuant to Government Code 8698.4, the city provides an annual report to the state that includes data about the number of people served by shelters and connected to permanent housing in the city, as well as the city's shelter capacity and permanent supportive housing inventory. The reporting dates for this report are July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. The report was submitted to the state on December 23rd, 2022 in order to meet the state's reporting deadline of January 1st. I'll provide some highlights of the data included in the report. Of the 16,640 shelter beds in the city, 12,077 are in facilities that participate in the Homelessness Management Information System, or HMIS, and report having served 16,031 people in fiscal year 21-22. The number of shelter beds in the city increased by 2,525 from the previous year. This can be attributed to the city's investment in additional shelter beds under the city's homelessness roadmap, which includes Project Roomkey, tiny home villages, and certain Project Homekey sites. The total number of individuals who are placed into all types of permanent housing decreased slightly from the previous year, from 4,864 to 4,818. Please note that the report erroneously states that this was a small increase rather than a decrease, but the numbers for each year are correct, and this error in wording was corrected when the report was sent to the state. Within this total of 4,818 individuals who were placed into all types of permanent housing, the number of residents who moved from shelters that participate in HMIS into permanent supportive housing, or PSH, decreased from the prior year from 288 to 261. Both the current and previous year have shown a decrease from pre-pandemic year statistics. For example, there were 477 placements in 2019. This decline in residents who have moved from a shelter into PSH can be attributed to lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact to government services, including housing placements. Inclusive of the 261 residents who moved from shelters into PSH, 286 persons moved from shelter into any type of permanent housing, including both PSH and non-PSH units. 2,732 persons moved into PSH without having access shelter prior to placement, and 322 residents have exited the system and are no longer in need of shelter or PSH within the city. There are 16,005 estimated PSH beds in the city, a decrease of 1,281 from the number of beds reported in the status report for the prior year. LAHSA has advised that the drop in beds is due to data pull timing and housing inventory count, or HIC processes. Programs may be removed from a given year's HIC if they are no longer operating or if they have not responded to the HIC for 2 consecutive years. Additionally, the 2021 annual status report used the draft version of the HIC, which had additional programs that had not yet been removed from the final 2021 HIC. Finally, in fiscal year 21-22, 6 new interim housing facilities with 829 beds were built in the city pursuant to Government Code 8698.4, and 6 additional shelters were under construction before the end of fiscal year 21-22, representing an additional 781 shelter beds. This concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to ask a quick question here, so something about these numbers was very, very surprising to me, which is that the beds served 16,000 individuals in fiscal year 21 through 22. And only 2,000 were documented as moving into some kind of permanent housing placement. Is that correct?
So the total number of individuals who were placed into all types of permanent housing was 4,818.
But from our interim shelter facilities, only 2,000 odd people moved from our interim shelters into permanent housing. Is that right?
Yes, that is from emergency shelter.
Emergency interim, whatever it is.
Yeah, I know that LAHSA is on the call. I'm not sure if they're able to speak more to that data point.
Well, so my question is really just, that seems like an astonishingly small number, moving from our interim housing sites and our emergency shelter beds into permanent housing. And I just wondered whether you could speak to why that number is so small. And what we need to be doing as a system to ensure that more of our people are moving from our interim sites into permanent housing.
Good afternoon. This is Nathaniel Brigado, Deputy Chief of Systems for LAHSA. So there are a couple of things at play here. One is that the vast majority of permanent supportive housing both within the city and across the county is not actually tracked in HMIS currently. The services are provided through the Department of Health Services, and they're...
What's not tracked in HMIS currently?
Permanent supportive housing services, including, which would include the move-ins to those sites, are tracked in Department of Health Services CHAMP record system. We are currently working with the Department of Health Services to integrate their CHAMP system and the LAHSA HMIS system. Which is why we publish a quarterly permanent supportive housing or permanent housing insights report, where we do gather data from DHS, DMH, the VA, et cetera, to provide additional details. This information, from my understanding, is pulled directly from HMIS and would not include the data from CHAMP.
So how would that impact?
So it would not record the move-ins into permanent housing.
Even from our own interim bed?
Yes, potentially. It depends on how the data is tracked on exit, and that's one of the issues that we are addressing at LAHSA. There's concerns around data quality. The field for move out from shelter is not has not been a federally required field, and so we are implementing that as a required field in HMIS in order to close out a record for any exit from a program.
So you're saying for future reporting of this data, the numbers will be far more accurate about where people went?
Correct. Additionally, sorry, I had another point, but I lost it there. Sorry.
Not a problem. So I just wanted to underscore here that I'm glad that you are making a change in order to make the system, the numbers reflect more accurately what the system is doing. 2,000 move-ins to permanent supportive housing or permanent housing of any kind from our interim beds is an astonishingly small number. This is a number that we're reporting to the state. And I just, I want to be and there's two sets of numbers that are in this council file, one from 3 years ago and one from the last year that I saw. And those numbers were equally bleak. And, I'm glad we're finally at a moment where we're looking at these bleak numbers and saying, oh, actually, they don't tell us the whole picture. They're not telling us what's happening here. And I think we just need to make a commitment going forward, particularly as we're moving into hopefully, again, a much more holistic, thoughtful era of planning our homelessness system in a collaborative fashion, that we really understand what's happening at our interim sites and where people are going to from those sites. And I would say including our motel programs.
Yes.
And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to include that data as well. Mr. Blumenfield?
If I can respond, I remember my second point, and there are actually two additional. One is that the total number moving into all permanent housing is reported in the report as 4,818. The lower number in the 2,000 range is for permanent supportive housing specifically. So there is a larger number moving into permanent housing that is reported. There is the data quality issue that I mentioned. The other piece is that this is part of the reason that we've been doing our work with California Policy Lab around the key performance indicators data that we had brought to the committee back in, I believe it was in December. In working with them to identify all of the places where there should be data points collected that may be missing in the report. So we are working on the data quality as well as ensuring that we can report out more accurate numbers, even if some of the data quality is still in progress. The other piece that is important here is that this is a trend that we had identified as being problematic in terms of folks moving through the shelter system into permanent housing, which is why we've been making the transitions in our system to align housing navigation and time-limited subsidies to the shelters directly to ensure that wherever possible, there is a direct exit pathway for every person entering shelter. This was some of the lessons that we learned with PRK and early on with PRK, seeing how difficult it was to move folks out with the system, with the resources as they existed, and the value that we saw in PRK of linking permanent housing resources directly to the participants. We've been making that shift across the system this fiscal year and should have full implementation of that moving into next fiscal year. And expect to see some significant improvements as a result of that alignment.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield?
Thank you. First, I want to underscore your point. I mean, I hope that this is a case that we're not seeing the full number because of other things, because it is a shockingly low number. And I just hope that it's wrong. But I wanted to understand why the numbers are low, not just that we're maybe not capturing all the information, but is it because of the lack of permanent supportive housing, or are there vacancies? And I've heard some rumors about a very large number of vacancies in the permanent supportive housing. And I'd like to know, do we have numbers on how many vacancies there are in our PSH sites?
Yes, we do. I don't have those in front of me. I apologize. I wasn't expecting to be asked that question. Do you have that data?
I do. Hi, Ann Sewell, General Manager, Los Angeles Housing Department. At any given moment, the vacancy number moves around, obviously, but HHH basically pushing out 1,500 units every quarter, 1,500 to 2,500 units every quarter, and us moving as quickly as we can to lease them up. There will be vacancies, and it's taking on average 3 to 4 months to lease up, and of course we're trying to shorten that period considerably. But I think when last we checked, it was taking 4 months to absorb every time we put new units out. And I would just say that when LAHSA talks about permanent housing, they don't mean just what we think of, like HHH and city-funded things. They're also talking about other forms of, leased housing.
So is there a number?
I can get you what the number was last month on HHH, and we can report that every month. We do to the HHH Oversight Committee, and can share that with you.
I mean, in ballpark, is it in the thousands or is it in the 50s?
In terms of the total number of units, at the end of the year, I think it was 1,000 units and 1,500 that we had just put into the ready to occupy list.
So we potentially have, at any given moment, 1,000 or 1,500 vacant units.
That's a lot.
Well, they get absorbed. So if you put out 1,500 every quarter, they're going to get absorbed, say 500 month one, 500 month two, so on and so forth. But then you'll put another 1,500 out. So we need to get you the reports on the rhythm of that.
It's not really adding up to me, because if we only got 2,000 people in, and we're putting in 1,500 units a quarter, you know, the math isn't adding up. And maybe I'm just not seeing it. I'm not suggesting anything.
Yeah,
I just don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me.
Right, and I'll start talking about things I don't know about in a second, but what I do know is not everybody goes into permanent supportive housing from the sources that Megan and Nathaniel were just talking about. They don't all go in from interim housing.
Oh, of course they don't. But we do have a major throughput problem. And we have way more people ready to go into permanent supportive housing than I'm under the impression that we have the housing for. But then when I hear at any given moment we have 1,500 empty units and we've only put in 2,000 people in the last, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I can't speak to the data of how, you know, I know the units we're putting out and I know what are leased. And I don't know where the other numbers are originating from.
So I want to just, in the interests of, we're in danger of losing quorum in the committee if we don't move through the rest of the agenda quickly. And so I just wanted to put a pin in this discussion because I think it's really important. It is definitely something that the committee is going to be thinking about over the next few agendas. And just wanted to underscore how important it is. And I know that others in the system are also thinking about this, so this is good. This is a good time for us to fix some of these throughput problems. And I would just say, you know, I think other cities have managed to do better on this. Even the county has managed to do better on some of this than we have. And so we need to find some solutions for our throughput challenges. And I think there's some good models to follow. And my hope is that we'll be following those models very soon.
Madam Chair, if you'll indulge this member, I just want to register for the record that it's preposterous that any of us can sleep at night when we drive past people on the street every day and there are vacant units.
Amen.
Agreed.
So I'm sorry, because my staff as of last week, we had 237 vacant HHH units, which meant an 11% vacancy rate. So they are leasing through, but I will yield back to the council committee.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the issue is not just with HHH lease up, but also with the use of our emergency housing vouchers, which has been significantly lower as well. So there's a lot of concerns around how we're effectively using these resources. So if we are comfortable, unless there's any other questions here, Mr. Verano, what action do we need to take here on this item? Is it just a note and file?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
So do we need to call the roll for the note and file?
We do not.
Okay. Let's move on to item 2 then. Mr. Verano, can you read the item into the record, please?
Item number 2 is a Proposition HHH Administrative Oversight Committee report relative to the first quarter Prop HHH quarterly report for fiscal year 2022-23, July 1st, 2022 to September 30th, 2022.
So we're going to have another CAO summary of this report from, I believe, from Michael Zerpes. Am I getting that name correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam. Oh, sorry.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Michael Zerpes with the Office of the City Administrative Officer. I'll be providing a quick summary of the Prop HHH quarterly report for quarter 1 of fiscal year 22-23. The report before you today includes expenditure information and updates on the Proposition HHH fiscal years 17-18, 18-19, 19-20, and 20-21 project expenditure plans. This report includes expenditures from all prior quarters through September 30th, 2022, specifically the first quarter of the 22-23 fiscal year. As of the first quarter, a total of $519.1 million has been expended from the Prop HHH program overall. This includes $472.4 million from the Prop HHH Permanent Supportive Housing and Project Home Key 2.0 programs, and also $46.7 million from the Prop HHH Facilities Program. We request that this committee note and file insofar as no further action is required. I'm available for any questions, and my colleagues from LAHD are also available.
Councilmember.
We lose the chair.
Councilmember Blumenfield is the vice chair. Could you take the meeting for a second?
Okay. Are there any questions on this? I mean, we can move to note and file, but Mr. Dawson.
No questions, Mr. Chair. I move that we note and file.
Okay. Second, I mean, I don't want to preempt our chair here, but hopefully she will be back in a moment. But actually, we can't even do that with two members, right? Have we lost quorum temporarily?
No, I'm here.
Okay, so we have.
Sorry, hi.
All right, we were going to note and file without you, but now that you're here, you can do it yourself.
Yeah, okay. Okay, unless there's any questions, we can note and file. Thank you, Mr. Zerbies. Mr. Verano, we don't need to call the roll, right?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
All right, let's move on to item 3. Mr. Verano, please read this item into the record.
Item number 3 is a Los Angeles Housing Department report relative to the implementation of the Right to Return and Right to Remain provisions of the Housing Crisis Act. Authority to amend contract number C-138119 with Interwest Consulting Group Incorporated for additional relocation and right to return services and related matters.
Okay, great. And here we have, do we have a presentation here? I don't believe so. I actually think here we have an amendment, proposed amendment from the department, and we have Emma Garcia here from the Housing Department who's going to read us the amendment.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. LHD and the CAO is requesting to add a new recommendation, which is, I will now read into the record. To instruct LHD to report to the council and mayor on the results of the right to return and land use fee studies and proposed fee recommendations.
So this would be an amendment to the existing recommendations. I'm comfortable with adding that amendment. This is a great item. I think, you know, I'm excited about what happened at Plum yesterday for the South LA CPIO. And I'm excited for some of the things that were considered in that CPIO to be considered at a citywide scale. And I think this gets us part of the way there in thinking through that. So I'm delighted to see this come before us, and I'm comfortable to move it forward unless there's any discussion from other committee members. Seeing none, Mr. Verano, can you please call the roll on this item as amended?
Councilmember Rahman.
Yeah.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson.
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Lee is absent. 4 ayes, and this item is approved as amended.
Thank you. And let's move on to item 12. Item 12 is, okay, Mr. Verano, could you please read this item into the record?
Yes, Madam Chair. Item 12 is a verbal update from the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority relative to the 2023 point-in-time count methodology and improvements.
And I believe we have Emily Von Henry from, hi.
Hi.
How are you? Welcome, finally. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, no worries. Thank you very much. I was just, calling home saying, okay, I'll be late for dinner.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
No, I get it. But thank you so much, Madam Chair and other council members for having me today. So again, thank you. I know my colleague Nathaniel met with you, I think last month, and you had some additional questions. So I'm just going to jump right into the questions. So one of the questions, what are we doing different this year? So I just wanted to share, what are we doing different this year? We're using a new vendor, which is ESRI, to help us with the PIT count, as well as assisting us with putting together a dashboard that all our community members at the deployment sites, the 160 plus, will be able to have a visual display of, as our community members are collecting the data from the point in time, we can actually see what's taking place in the field. So the goal this time was to ensure we have real-time information, so that way, for example, if we see a particular jurisdiction where 8 o'clock next Wednesday, we're not seeing any data, so we know that there's an issue. So let's, and to mitigate that technology issue, we also have the paper census track, which we have tallies on, so that way our community members, because as we know, the digital device still impacts a lot of community members. Not everyone, not Wi-Fi service is not prevalent everywhere. So we have some of those mitigations that we put in place. How are we building trust? So again, one way we can build trust with our community is by being transparent with the data, how we're collecting it, how we're processing the information. So I just wanted to just start with that framework, so that way I can take additional questions that you may have. And again, the point in time, it's an estimate, and it's on the 24th, 25th, and 26th, which is next week. I hope I encourage all of you to volunteer to assist us with the count. And
fantastic. All right, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I can keep going. I'm really excited about this count this year. So
no, that's great. So are we. And are your volunteer base looking good here?
I mean, it's looking good. I mean, last week I was worried because I'm like, oh my God, the ticker is not moving. But as of yesterday, we had 3,307. Our goal is, at least our goal in the organization, is try to get to, we're aiming for 8,000, but if we can get to 5,000, high 5,000, 6,000. So if you can get the word out for us, we really need volunteers in SPA 2, is where we're seeing, and SPA 2 is the first night. So we're trying to get our community out there. We need volunteers and more volunteers in SPA 2. The numbers are not looking great right now, so we're really encouraging our community members. So we've been doing a lot of social media ads, a lot of ads in the papers to really encourage the community to come out and support the count.
Great. So we will definitely do that, and I'll encourage everyone in council on Friday when we're all together to make sure that they're spreading the word as well. I wanted to ask just one question, which has come up a little bit in neighborhoods that I'm familiar with, where census tracts showed vast differences between one count and another. So this was, I think, identified in that one Venice tract where it showed 0 people, and I think that was widely covered. But I saw that as well in a couple of tracts in my district, and in districts and in tracts that I was familiar with. That nearby, we know who's there, we know who's not there. We saw pretty big differences between one year and another in terms of counting, which suggested that there may have been some challenges, perhaps technological, perhaps otherwise, in those areas. Some undercounts and some what I felt were overcounts based on what I knew of those neighborhoods. Do you have a strategy in place, like a bar, when you see a big change from from one year to another in a tract, that you go back and you double check those numbers? Because to me, that feels like one way in which you can ensure that the count is accurate.
So thank you so much, Madam Chair, for this question. One of the things we did, so we were able to hire a demographer this year. So he started 2 weeks ago, and I would have had Dr. Mitchell. I would have brought Dr. Mitchell to this forum today, but he's getting ready for 2023. And you're absolutely right. So the goal this year is, bringing in a demographer, bringing on 2 data scientists. As the data is coming through, how do we reconcile? If we're seeing there's 0, counts in certain areas, that's an indicator for us to, take stock and say, wait, something doesn't look correct. So the goal of this time with the count, I am not going to say it's going to be 100% perfect. I am allowing myself maybe about a 1-2%, error rate there. But our goal this year is if we see anomalies, to really check and say something's wrong, something's not correct. And again, the other thing I wanted to share, and to ensure that we don't have zero tracks in some areas, we're taking 1 year of data of our outreach data and we're overlaying that on top of our point in time numbers. So that way we can actually see, how the data, what's the data telling us about our unsheltered population throughout the county of Los Angeles. It's something we've never done before. It's something that, I've been speaking to a few researchers on, and they said this sounds like a great way to look at the data. But also, I want to make it clear this year, we are working with a lot of other city partners in the county, looking at their ArcGIS maps to make sure that we are using the right layer, so that way, as we're looking at the different council districts that have moved, my goal is to minimize and build trust with our council staff around the data. So the goal is, as we're going through the validation process with HUD, we would like to bring members from certain council districts, for example, Councilman Blumenfield, like Semi. She's a data junkie like I am, so she's somebody we're going to invite in and just have a look at the data without the validation piece. So again, bringing our communities, bringing some stakeholders and some researchers to say, hey, here's the data. It hasn't been validated by HUD, but here's what we're seeing.
That's great. Thank you. I think that will be really useful. And I love that word trust. I think that's the key in all of our work moving forward related to homelessness related data and homelessness related interventions. Mr. Blumenfield.
Yes, thank you. And I think I agree with Chairwoman on that. It's really important to build the trust. I think this last one, we may have lost a fair amount of trust. So it's important to build that back, and comparing it to actual outreach data makes a lot of sense as well, because the anomalies were deafening in this last one. But one of the questions I had and that prompted this discussion today, last time, was around some of the projections and how they're done. Like the one that jumps out at me, the severely mentally ill number. For example, in this last count, my district was about 17%, but just north in Mr. Lee's district, it was 36%. And frankly, I just don't believe that that's that big of a difference. It's the same, a lot of the same population going back and forth. And so how is that calculated?
I know it's one of the questions we ask on the survey, and to be very transparent, Councilmember Blumenfield, I will have to get back and find out how that number is calculated. I don't want to tell you this is how it's calculated, but I will find that out for you tonight, and I will email you to find out how that number is calculated. Because one of the things, it's one of the survey questions on the demographic survey. And so it's one of the questions we have. So, asking someone, are you suffering from any, mental health, illnesses and so forth? And if the person says yes, then that's an indicator that goes on that survey. And then that goes into the multiplier. So if the question is, how is that multiplier developed to calculate, our unsheltered population that are suffering from mental illness, I can get that information for you. I know.
I appreciate that. I mean, that was what prompted this whole discussion. So I'm a little disappointed that you're not coming with that answer, because that was the question. That was the question that prompted this whole thing.
Yeah, I am so sorry. That did not come to me. It didn't bubble up to me that was one of the questions you had.
Yeah. I got you. Well, yeah, to get the answer would be great. I mean, it sounds like it's self-attested and then run through a multiplier. It just, I guess I'd like to learn not just how it's done, but why it's done that way, because it really doesn't seem, frankly, very informative. Out of context, and the numbers varied so wildly between districts that it makes you really question the scientific accuracy of it. And we want to make sure that if we're building trust, that there is a real strong and transparent foundation for what these numbers mean, because they have real impacts on policy and on how we do things. you know, and number, I look at something like that and I just say, well, then how do I trust any of this if I know this to be wrong?
I know one of the partners we wanted to partner with this year, and I believe we are, with the Department of Mental Health, to really assist. They wanted to do a survey alongside our demographic survey with the field surveyors to go through a deeper dive on the mental health questionnaire.
Okay, great, thank you.
But I will get that information for you tonight on how that is calculated.
Yeah, and I do think it's worth actually coming, you know, we can discuss about whether you want to maybe even add it to the council file, whatever the explanation is for this, because this was part of the explicit discussion. I also think that the understanding was that the demographer themselves would be here, but I understand that they were just hired. And that
no, he was hired 2 weeks ago. I literally hired him Christmas Eve.
Got it. Yeah, and I do think having that individual present for this committee will be very, very useful. In creating exactly the trust that we're trying to create with this particular count. So with that, if there's no other questions, I don't think there's any action to be taken on this, right?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Great. So I think, thank you, Ms. Henry.
And I apologize, you know, council members, you know, if I had known, I would have made sure I had that, but I'll get it for you tonight.
Yeah, we did communicate with, I think, people from LASA that we had specific questions, and the questions from last time were communicated, but I'll make sure and resend those. And my hope is that we can move forward with some more specific answers. So thank you again. Your energy is also really welcome at the end of a very long meeting. So I appreciate it.
And we're counting on your support for getting more volunteers.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Our goal is to build trust in the community with our homeless count data.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the other thing that I would just ask, you know, going forward is really just to say, if communities have questions about tracks, if they have questions about areas where they're not seeing, for example, in the Sepulveda Basin, there were some real discrepancies between this time and last time. How can they reach out to you and get answers from the LASA team on that?
We do have a homeless count email address, because what we wanted to do was to isolate all of the questions that was coming to us around homeless count and not have to depend strictly on either my email account or Catherine's or Molly's or Nathaniel's. So in my correspondence back tonight, I will have that email account address listed. The other thing we wanted to do after the count was to have, I call it like an open, not office hours, sort of like a
town hall.
Yes, for our community members, you know, to come and ask questions about the count.
That will be great. I think that would be really, really fantastic, and I encourage making that happen. So,
okay.
Thank you so much. And with that, Mr. Verano, do we have anything else on the desk?
The desk is clear, Madam Chair.
Well, hurrah. Amazing. Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you to the committee members. As I think even in the committee meetings that happened at the end of last year, I was really happy to see the level of discussion and discourse and back and forth. And I think through this discourse and back and forth, we can really craft policies that are better for Los Angeles. And so I'm so grateful to all of you. And thank you all for your time. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.